What's up, dads? Your boy Big Dave back with another episode of Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette. We have an awesome Imperium Press author with us today to talk about something really, really based that you culture dads out there are all going to love. We have Mr. Academic Agent here to talk about wrestling. What's going on, Mr. AA?
Thanks, Dave. I thought you were going to say, weighing 260 pounds. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for this. I was just saying that in a previous life, I had many pro wrestling podcasts, and in fact, to the extent where in that kind of wider wrestling fandom, I may well still be known as as someone who presented podcasts back in the day. And I retired, quote unquote, from wrestling podcasting back in, I think it was maybe 2016, when I started doing the channel, talking about politics more. And so, if this is ever found by any of those fans, they'll be very excited.
Excellent.
So what does the WWE, super fan to Shakespeare scholar pipeline actually look like?
Well, I mean, in a strange way, there's quite a bit of crossover, right? Because Shakespeare is theater, and wrestling is theater, which is drama, really. And if you think about it, it's kind of like, you could think of like Greek theater, Greek drama. There's a chorus. There's a how the crowd is the chorus, is the Greek chorus, and the crowd is a huge part of pro wrestling, right? And then the other part of it, you'd have to come forward a bit to think of like the medieval morality plays or something. Wrestling always has the good guys and bad guys. Even where wrestling is presented as at its most quote unquote legitimate, right? Such as in Japan, which has a huge wrestling culture, which we can talk about later if you want to, or in the 1970s. In the 1970s NWA, where it was presented almost like a pure sport, or in this country, there was British wrestling, and we had something called World of Sports, and there was a promotion here that presented wrestling much more straight, right? I.e., there was less gimmicks and less cartoony elements. Even when it's presented at its straightest, there is still a good versus bad element. The fan favorite and the rule breaker. And even though that's very simple, good guy, bad guy, it's, they settle their differences using violence. There is so much. I've said before, something like all of the world is in Shakespeare, but also something like all the world is in pro wrestling. And in fact, as I've got more into politics, I have become convinced, this is something we could talk about later, that if you understand pro wrestling, you understand politics, because it's the same thing. It's exactly the same, especially since Donald Trump has become a major figure in American politics. It is just pure pro wrestling, up and down.
That's funny you bring that up, because Donald Trump was on Raw quite a few times, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, and in fact, Donald Trump, a huge part of wrestling is what they call psychology. There's psychology in terms of how you tell a story in the ring, but there's also psychology in terms of how do you get a rise out of the fans one way or the other. How do you control that crowd? How do you get them eating out of the palm of your hand? And Donald Trump, I think possibly more than any figure in politics, but certainly in recent memory, he completely understands. He understands that he is a heel for the shit libs, right? And he knows how to work them. And he also understands if you ever go to a rally, that's Trump working babyface. He understands. So he is so good at manipulating the crowd reaction. I just wish he was better at actual politics.
Yeah,
because he sucks at the actual ABCs of politics, but he's good at that bit. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you want to take this, guys.
It might be because we've already sort of gone into, like, you've mentioned a couple of technical terms that I wasn't aware of until I looked into it, like heel and babyface and all that.
Kayfabe.
Yeah, exactly. So usually what we'll do is we'll give a bit of a sort of like background or sketch or historical sketch. Dave, did you have anything in that vein that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. So when we talk about professional wrestling, as Mr. A talked about just here, it sort of blossomed over time. It didn't really have a lot of the elements that we look at today. When we look at professional wrestling today, or even in the time that a lot of us, aging millennials, Gen Xers, and before are familiar with, the classic era, the attitude era of WWF or WWE, wrestling in the beginning didn't really have this type of style. It was a lot of it was carnival wrestling. When you would go to a carnival and there'd be one big tough guy, but anybody could come up here and blah, 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 and if you beat me, you win this money, whatever. And that started out as kind of like a spectacle. You'd have one big, huge, strong guy. You'd have the strongest guy in the county, and he would call people out, and they would wrestle him and stuff like that. And it was very much modeled after folk style or catch-as-catch-can style of wrestling or freestyle wrestling, which is a really organic cultural type of martial arts that's present in a lot of Europe. European martial arts is very much based off of wrestling, which comes off of things like ringen and old styles of grappling, Greco-Roman, pancration, obviously things like sambo. But when we're talking about Northern Europe, when we're talking about especially the British Isles and some of the Germanic speaking countries, we are talking about what we now call folk style or catch wrestling, or catch-as-catch-can, I believe is what they call it in Great Britain. So after this, they start go ahead.
Sorry, Dave. I don't want to interrupt too much, but there's a really cool bit of footage that if people want to see what this was like, where you get a guy, pro wrestler, goes into the ring, challenges the crowd, somebody from the crowd comes, and he basically, hands their ass to them using his superior knowledge of holds. There's a famous wrestler called William Regal, who I'm sure you're aware of.
Yep.
In his early days, he worked. They were still doing this. He was working towns like Blackpool, and there's about a 10-minute bit of footage where you can actually watch a young William Regal. His name was Stephen Regal back then. Actually do this, fight a random guy from the crowd, over the course of 10 minutes and making them tap out, whatnot, which is the true carny roots of wrestling. So I just wanted to slip that in there because if you haven't seen it, it's really cool to watch. Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, absolutely. That it started out as Mr. A. It's always kind of been theater, and it's always just kind of. But it started out with local roots, and it was actually pretty local up until Vince McMahon took over and unified a lot of the regions and stuff like that. And I'm sure Mr. AA knows all that kind of history. I'll pass it over to him in a minute. But this was the roots of wrestling. And then eventually it started to become more of a spectacle. Obviously, the gimmicks and everything that we know about with modern wrestlers today didn't come in until a little bit later. But very early on, you get guys like Bruno Sammartino and so forth. And these guys were the first guys to be selling out Madison Square Garden and having these big giant shows of wrestling. And it was you had some scripting in this, but it was still more, it was like halfway between what we'd understand to be like a collegiate wrestling match and what we understand today to be like a pro wrestling match. And then, more wrestling came into how we understand it today, Hulk Hogan and Macho Man, and you started getting gimmicks. And this really started with guys like, what was his name? Freddie Blassie and
John Tolos.
Yeah, fellas like that came in, started doing that, and then from them graduated. Then we get the Hulk Hogan's and the Macho Mans and these types of guys. But Ric Flair obviously was one of the very earliest. Nature Boy, he's still kicking around. But that is long and short. That is kind of a very brief overview of where wrestling came from. So wrestling has always sort of been with us, and I've read some things that talk about how this idea of the spectacle of wrestling, the one big guy challenging people from the crowd that we saw in carnivals in the late 1800s going into the early 1900s. This was something that apparently went back into the Middle Ages and beyond. We don't even know how old this was. So this is kind of an old tradition of the spectacle of theater in martial arts, in our style of martial arts, European style of martial arts, which is wrestling. Right. So it's sort of always been with us. And it's not really a big surprise that it would become such a huge phenomenon in pop culture today.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously there's lots to say about each of those things. I would actually say that it's been fully it's actually been fully a work, what they call a work, right? Since at least the 1920s, 1930s. There was a very famous wrestler in the 30s called Jim Londos, who sold out various stadiums and things back then. And, Lou Thez, I think, was around then as well. It was worked in a much more realistic style, Dave, but it was still a work, if you know what I mean. It was still 100% work. When we use the term work and worker, what happened is that in those early carnival, in those very early carnival days where the guy was being picked out of the crowd, every once in a while, they'd pick a guy out of the crowd who was like genuinely quite hard. I might actually like beat the wrestler. Yeah. So after a while, they thought, well, I mean, this sucks. We did, this kind of shown us up, and it would kill the town. If you imagine, they came, that word would get around in the town, all those wrestlers that came, Billy here, he kicked their ass. So what they do is they plant somebody in the crowd so that they were always going to pick, basically the guy is picking his buddy who is a worker coming out of the crowd. So that's where the term worker comes from, is the fact that the guy that was being picked in the crowd was a wrestler as well. And then they'd work a match as if it was real, for the punters who were called marks. Hence hence all of these kind of carny terminology, because it was a trick, right? Everybody thought it was a real fight, but it wasn't. And up through the 30s and into the 50s, I think there was a period where national TV became a thing, like Gorgeous George and, like you mentioned, Fred Blassie and some of these characters who were around at that time. There was a big, I think his name was Fred West, and he had like kind of national TV from Chicago. And so there was a period where wrestling kind of went big time in the 50s, which is somewhat forgotten now because there's not that much footage of it. But then what happened is kind of fascinating in a way. In America, there was this thing called the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, where every territory had its own promotion, local promotion, which was then given exclusive rights by the State Athletic Commission in each kind of area. Each state had its own State Athletic Commission, and they would have exclusive rights to run venues in that area. And the National Wrestling Alliance held this together through a series of, like, all of the promoters would know each other, and they would agree not to run in each other's towns. So it was very, it was much like how the mafia worked, where each Don would have his own territory, and he would just run that area. So you'd have a local hometown hero, a babyface, And in some ways, this is what Bruno Sammartino was, Dave. Even though the old WWF, as it was known by, run by Vince Senior, was quite a big territory because they ran New York, New Jersey. They went all the way up to Maine, and they went all the way down to Washington. So that's a big chunk of, it was like a super territory. But basically, it stayed within those limits. And then you had, down the south, you had Georgia. That was a big territory. You had Jim Crockett Promotions. They ran Mid-Atlantic, kind of Virginia and the Carolinas. That was another territory. Then you had Texas, run by Fritz von Erich. He basically ran Dallas. The Funk Brothers ran Amarillo. I'm trying to remember some others now. You had a guy called Nick Gulas who run kind of the Mid-South Oklahoma region. The Jarretts ran Memphis with Jerry Lawler. So these were all individual places. So and what people have to understand is that back in those days, they would run the same place every month or sometimes every week. Okay, so if you were a wrestling fan in those days, you'd get to see the wrestlers every week. If you had a local promotion, it'd be every Friday night or every Saturday night or whatever. You'd be down there. So you can see there's a kind of community aspect, because if anything you go to every single week, you'll get to know like a whole deal around it. When Vince McMahon kind of went national and changed wrestling and so on, they stopped it. Now they were, in one night we're going to be in Baltimore, next night we're going to be in Austin, next night we're going to be in. So you can imagine if you were in one of those towns, you were used to seeing wrestling every week or every month. Whereas now you may have to wait like a year for the WWF to roll in. So that's a big. I think a lot of people don't understand. It look on paper, it looks like wrestling got a lot bigger in the 80s, right? Because Vince was big and it was national and it even went international, so that even someone growing up in Britain like me could watch it. But if you think about it in terms of raw ticket sales, in the 70s, basically every single territory was selling out every single week and every single month around the country. So if you actually look at the total number of people going to watch wrestling, it was huge in the 60s and 70s. And that's a little bit of kind of local folk history that I think has actually been lost in many parts of America. And I find that earlier period where it's the 60s and 70s quite interesting, because each local area, each local territory had its own character, had its own style, had its own set of heroes and villains. And it then ended up telling you about the people of that region. I mean, it was even up into the 80s, a lot of those Southern boys would still come out with the Confederate flag, rebel flag on their faces and so on. If you watch Mid-South wrestling from the early 80s, you can watch people getting tarred and feathered in the ring. And Bill Watts getting on the mic saying, "Yeah, you deserve it, sissy boy," and stuff like that. I mean, it's fucking brilliant. But you understand what I'm saying? There's something edgy and dangerous in the fact that you have this decentralized thing being run by basically a fraternity of brothers. Very hard to get into the wrestling industry. They might even break your leg on the way in or something like that. That was entirely self-contained, and the only policing it had really was from these kind of mafia-like promoters. And there are all sorts of stories from back in those days. Like I mentioned Ted DiBiase to you, Dave, before we came on air. When he was breaking into the business, he worked for that Nick Gulas. Not Gulas, McGurk. He was working for McGurk. And I don't know if you remember in the 80s, there was that ring announcer who was had the big blonde hair. Do you remember her? Her name was Mike McGurk. She sometimes announced the guys. Well, he started going out with her, and she was the promoter's daughter. Well, when he found out, he was like, I'm going to kill him. Got a gun and just went down there. And that was the kind of world it was. And it was like, and the guys were like, well, they thought they'd lead him on. They knew this would happen. And they used it as a rib on like an 18-year-old Teddy DiBiase. He almost got killed. He almost had his brains blown out. And this is the sort of thing.
It sounds kind of like overblown to say, but it just strikes me that this earlier period that's more localized, and it's more of a sort of like each different locality is sort of like run by a local don, and it's almost like a fraternity or like a guild that you get in. It really reminds me a lot of European feudalism, actually. Yeah, it sounds kind of strange to say.
Feudalism. It's exactly feudalism. And there are guys in the wrestling business who were like royalty. Okay, and this is the weird thing, is that once you start to know this stuff, you then start to understand, oh, well, that's why he ended up with that one. One of those guys who was royalty was Harley Race, who then later, as a joke from Vince McMahon, was made the king Harley Race, right? But I mean, Harley Race, when he broke into the business, the first thing he had to do to pay his dues was drive around this huge fat guy. I'm trying to remember what his name was now. What's his name? Humphrey or something?
Haystack Calhoun or something?
It was a Haystacks Calhoun. Anyway, this guy was huge. Happy Humphrey. That's what Happy Humphrey. Okay. Right? He was like 500, 600 pounds. Oh. And Harley Race, who came from, a lot of these guys came from like tough backgrounds, maybe lost a parent, didn't have, kicked out of school. And, wrestling was hard to break into. So Harley Race, when he was kind of working his way up and paying his dues, and this is when he was a teenager, his job was to drive around this Happy Humphrey. And Happy Humphrey was so fat that, he had to have a shit in the bath. And so, and Harley Race, as a young guy, would have to wash him with a giant sponge, and he couldn't wipe his ass or anything, So when we talk about people paying dues to get into the business, it was fucking brutal. But then when Harley Race, years later, when he became the world champion, he was just like a made man, like absolutely bulletproof. When he started talking, everybody would be quiet. And to think about how Wild West this was, even in as late as 1985, 1986, when Vince McMahon started running Kansas, which was Harley Race's town, he had a piece in that territory. Harley Race's first reaction was to grab a revolver and to go straight down there, confront Vince McMahon, and he was like, "I'm going to kill him." And this was the kind of work. What I'm saying is that the world, the kind of world behind wrestling, the actual world that these guys came from, it was genuine, like a kind of Wild West, like a kind of genuine experiment in what happens. If there are basically no regulations, and like you say, Dave, it's basically feudal, with a really strict hierarchy, and I find it fascinating. And then to think about it on the art side and the arts and culture side, the actual product, what they're putting on and the stories they're telling, is basically what would happen if it was just left up to the people. There's no managerial elite filtering what's coming through. And that's even
a lot of dynasties as well. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Go on, Dave. Sorry. Go on.
Oh no, I was just saying that you see a lot of people like the grandchild of this, and there's a lot of bloodlines in there. Cody Rhodes is out there wrestling. That's Dusty Rhodes. You got Gold Dust, who's what's his name? I think his name's just Dustin Rhodes. And you got all these families, these family lines that are in there that are, some of them are 2, 3, 4 generations of guys that are in the business.
Absolutely, and in just like if in the mafia, if you're from one of those kind of wrestling royalty backgrounds, you were a made man. Nobody would mess with you. I mentioned Ted DiBiase. His father, in fact, it wasn't his real father. He was his adoptive father, but it didn't really matter. Was Iron Mike DiBiase, who was kind of really well respected in the business and so on. And, so it was that DiBiase, even before he was 20, was already kind of touted as a made man. Like
did DiBiase's son wrestle too?
DiBiase's son wrestled as well, yeah. Ted, did he have two of them? I think he had two of them. But yeah, there was a Ted Jr. too. So, I mean, and the Harts, obviously, and the Von Erichs, and there were so many of them. But
Cowboy Bob Thornton's son, Randy Orton.
Yeah, no, and of course, Bob Orton Jr., his father, Bob Orton Sr., was a wrestler as well. So,
oh, really? Yeah.
You do get these. You do get the dynasties. You're right. But I don't know. I don't know how you want to take this, because I could talk all day here. I could talk about the mechanics of storytelling within the match if you want. What is actually going on?
I think that's a good idea. Because I was earlier. I said that we should sketch out the history, and I think that kind of takes us now to some of the terminology that gets used in the actual, wrestling jargon, and what it is, what the structure of a typical match looks like, and as a piece of dramatic storytelling, and how the structure actually goes, because it definitely does follow a fairly set formula for the most part. I mean, there's obviously variations and everything like that, but like a Elizabethan drama, it's got its particular structure. So do you want to fill that in for us a little bit?
Actually, before we get into that, is it okay? I wanted to hear how AA got into it, because I'll tell you, this is always straight. Every friend of mine that I've had overseas that's in the UK, not every, but a ton of them love wrestling. And I always thought it was just an American phenomenon. So I want to hear, how did you was it big over there? How did you come into it?
So I mean, I can say really quickly, wrestling was big here a little bit later than it was there. Okay. When I say big, I'm talking about Vince McMahon's expansion, right? The real high point in America for, the kind of golden era where it was Hogan and Andre and all of that, was probably WrestleMania 3, which was 1987. So, there's a kind of really hot streak from about 1984 when Hogan comes in to about 88, 89, right? That's the kind of real hot streak golden era. And then if you look at the gate receipts and the audience figures, they start to decline after that, for various different reasons. But Vince doesn't really start his massive expansion into England until the early 90s. And in 1992, there was SummerSlam 92, which happened in Wembley Stadium. Another huge crowd, by the way. I think that was 80,000 or something. It was a huge crowd. In fact, I had one of my childhood friends, he went there. And it's funny, if you get the VHS tape, he is... the camera pans over and he bends down to tie his shoelace. So he is not on the tape. He's doing up his shoelaces. So you see his mum and his brother, and he's not there. But so really, a couple of years before that, it was kind of building. So it was everywhere through the WWF marketing. And then at the same time, WCW somehow got this 2 a.m. slot on Thursday nights or something. In fact, I remember it well. I don't know if you're aware of Prisoner Cell Block H, being in Australia there, Mike, but there was this old cheesy old Australian show set in a women's prison called Prisoner Cell Block H, and it would be packaged in a double hour with WCW Worldwide. So it'd be Prisoner Cell Block H followed by WCW, and I used to set do you remember setting the VHS recorder to tape at set periods, you come on at 2, And in fact, in the end, I've never really slept that well, even when I was a kid. So in the end, I was just like, sometimes just stay up and watch that. So I actually watched WCW in that period as well. So 91, 92, 93. And then I changed schools around that time. It's funny the way these things work. And, when you first change schools, especially at that age, I was like 9 or 10, it's kind of quite difficult to walk into it. Like everybody's already got for their friendship groups, everybody, so it took me a while. It took me a few months to start making friends. And I remember it was through pro wrestling. It was through, I don't know how it came up, but it just came up one day. And that was now and in. That was something I could talk about with the other guys in my class. And when I just moved school, and it was funny because I to make matters worse, when I moved schools, I was at a what they call in this country, it was basically a private school, right? It was like a prep. I was at a prep school, and at a certain point, it got really expensive, and I had to move, and I went to a Catholic convent school. Right, much lower fees, but obviously I had to move schools. And when I came, I had kind of quite a posh accent compared to everybody else, and I had a briefcase. Can you imagine turning up? Hi everyone, I've got a briefcase, and I sound posher than all the other kids. And I don't know if you remember IRS Dave, Irwin R. Shyster, the tax man. He used a briefcase. He actually tagged.
Great name.
Did you remember, right? Irwin R. Shyster was a tax man wrestler, and he had a briefcase, and he used the briefcase as a weapon. Okay. And so the fact I had this briefcase, obviously any kid with a briefcase, especially a new kid with a briefcase, is going to get picked on, or not picked on, is like not going to struggle to make friends or whatever. Until I used the briefcase as a pro wrestling weapon. I just got to use it, smash someone on the head with or whatever. And so in a strange way, in that part of my life, pro wrestling became almost like a kind of social icebreaker, which was weird because it was pretty short. Like by about 93, I think it was well and truly done. Like, wrestling kind of comes and goes. It's cool, and then it's not. And everybody stops paying attention. But for whatever reason, I never did. And so I was like kind of, I didn't do it openly. I just kind of secretly carried on watching like all through 94, 95. And then suddenly it came back with the Attitude Era. And even though it was meant to be, it was the Monday Night Wars. But in this country, they showed it on Friday nights. And, we watch wrestling. Me and my brother, we watch wrestling every Friday, and we get a Chinese takeaway, and we'd what would we do? We'd watch pro wrestling. We'd watch Raw every Friday night with the Chinese, and so that was something we did all the way through, pretty much until 2001 or so, and then that was the early days of the internet, right? I remember I had the AOL, remember the little old chat rooms and all of that, the kind of 56K and all. So that was a kind of early internet scene, pro wrestling analysis and so on. And so when I got online, I then started finding out about all these kind of shits. Okay, I had an idea it was fake, but there's all this other stuff behind it, Yeah. So that was kind of, I kind of caught that. And
do you remember, real quick, I'm sorry, do you remember in the AOL days, I can't remember if it was on the WWF website or if it was on AOL, you could go into wrestling chat rooms and the actual wrestlers would like pop in and talk to people. And everybody would be in these chat rooms waiting for these guys.
Yeah, so I remember. Yeah, I do remember. Yeah. And in fact, I don't know why they don't I remember back in those days, I don't know if it was because of memory or whatever, chat rooms were limited to a certain amount of people. And it was like a one in, one out policy. I don't know why they don't do that. They could use that function again. Seems like one of those things that everybody's forgotten. But yeah, I remember it pretty well. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that you just don't, I always think like men in general have trouble like letting their childhood go. Do you ever watch that film Toy Story 3? I watched Toy Story 3, and there's a scene in that where they're talking about like it's time to put childish things away. And I was like sobbing in the middle of the cinema, like loudly, and everybody turned around. Like, what the hell is this guy? And my ex-wife at the time, she was just like bursting out, like crying with laughter. But it broke. I mean, honestly, Toy Story 3 broke me because there's something about that, and I think all men are the same. They really struggle to let go of those things that they were really into at a certain age. I don't know if you. I mean, this whole podcast, Culture Dad's podcast, in a way, is a form of that, right? I mean, am I wrong?
Yeah, it's very imbued with nostalgia. I mean, we just the other week we talked about like my all-time favorite genre of music and everything. That was a real trip down memory lane and everything. And, we love that sort of thing. We can't let go of the past, and it's just part of who we are. It continues to be, no matter how old we get. It's definitely a thing for us.
Why do we have to put it away, though? It's in favor of what? In favor of being a more conducive wage slave? You know what I mean? To be more concerned with fucking boring things. I get it. Like the whole millennial kidult phenomenon of just like nostalgia porn and all this kind of stuff, and infantile young men that collect Funko Pops. Obviously, I'm against that. But there's the exact opposite. Which, my parents are boomers, right? So, and luckily, my parents were pretty cool with certain things. For example, my parents were very. They encouraged me to continue to pursue music. I remember there's like one point in my life when I really started getting into politics, and I sort of stopped playing guitar and stopped really getting into music. And my parents, both of them, they got divorced. They had a horrible divorce. And both of them on either ends were like, what are you doing? Why aren't you playing guitar? Why aren't you, you love that. Why aren't you doing that? So my parents were pretty cool, but there was still this, you have to become this, I don't know how to articulate it. You have to shed these things to become this version of an adult, this archetype of adult that we have made. And effectively the archetype of adult that modern society wants men to become is one that just isn't fun. That isn't fun. It like leaves these things behind, doesn't. And what happens is, I think a lot of times when people that do that, they go through that transformation, they then as adults have trouble relating with their children. I think guys in our generation that are a little bit more reluctant to give up these like childhood interests have an easier time relating with our children. You know what I mean? I can get into the things that my sons are into because I still remember that. You know what I mean? I remember episodes of He-Man and G.I. Joe and freaking whatever we were watching. And I can bring it up for him and we can share in that. Right? So, I don't know.
I also think are always... Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's an underrated civilizational driver, though, as well. It's going to sound ridiculous, right? But so many of the kind of big things that people have made in history are actually driven by exactly this. I mean, I can give it a small example, right? Take Disneyland, for example. Disneyland is an articulation of Walt Disney's, the original Walt Disney, of his childhood. Main Street USA is his nostalgia. And that was powerful enough for him to kind of, create this whole world. Or even in pro wrestling now, like look at Ted Turner or who's that guy, Tony Khan. I mean, these guys were basically what they call money marks, right? They had a childhood feeling for it, so they wanted to keep it going. And I see that. I see that fueling a lot of things. That I take my little one sometimes to like the steam trains, the steam fairs that are all around the country, and that is almost entirely fueled by men who were into steam trains as a kid. So I do think it has quite a bit of power. Anyway, sorry, Mike.
Oh yeah, I was just going to sort of echo that sentiment, basically, that part of being a good dad is being able to see things from your kid's perspective and to know what they like and to know what they're going to like and to give them something that they, give them something that you never had. You know what I mean? Like something cool from your childhood or something cool that you think they'll enjoy. Like with my kids, we wrestle. And it's like, we call it wrestling, and it's like they ask to do it all the time, like every day. It's like, I want to wrestle, Dad. It's like, all right, so we'll go into like this like one room where everything's cleared away. We got a little space, and each of us, me included, we all have like a handful of our own particular technical moves that we'll do or whatever. And the whole thing is like this little morality play. You know what I mean? There's a 3-act structure. It's always best 2 out of 3. It always goes the same way. The kids win the first match, and then by some dirty trick in the second match, Dad wins, and that raises the stakes. And again, it gets them. Sometimes my youngest, she'll stomp off and start crying or whatever. And inevitably she'll come back, and they'll team up on me, and then in the third round they always win. It always goes the same way, right? And they just love it. They cannot get enough of it. So, and I mean, myself not having really grown up with wrestling except for sort of by osmosis, absorbing it through the culture and everything. This is like, this is my little way of sort of passing that on to them. You know what I mean? And they just can't get enough of it.
In a strange way, Mike, you have actually stumbled on the actual structure of like 99% of wrestling matches. I mean, not the 2 out of 3 falls part, but I mean, the classic structure that they talk about is shine, right? Heat, comeback, finish, right? So the shine. So if it's 1-on-1. Babyface versus heel. The babyface is the good guy. Heel is the bad guy. Typically and classically, the babyface doesn't cheat. The heel always cheats, right? So the shine sequence is, the babyface hits the ring. Maybe the heel kind of begs off, sneaks out, tries to break his momentum. But ultimately, there's a sequence at the start of the match where the babyface is on top. He has a few big moves maybe to pop the crowd. Everybody's excited. My hero's here. He's kicking the villain's ass. It's great. Okay. Then the heel will do something cheap, thumb to the eye, kick, low blow maybe. What are some other cheap things that they made? They'll do something to chair maybe. They take out. There'll be something that the heel does cheap to cut off the babyface's shine. And then it transitions into what is known as a heat sequence, which is where the heel then is in control of the match, and he unloads a lot of his offense, his offense on the babyface. Maybe he'll give a couple of suplexes, backbreaker. He'll go through his repertoire, and the babyface during this period is garnering sympathy from the crowd. He's hurt. He's in trouble. We're worried about him because it looks like the heel is going to win. Something will happen, and you'll get another transition where the babyface actually starts to come back. There's this ray of hope. It depends on how long the match is. Sometimes the heel will cut that off, keep his heat going a bit longer. Sometimes he'll actually, sometimes it will be the genuine comeback. And then the babyface rallies, and you go from that into the finish, which is basically how does the match end. In your classic Hulk Hogan match, the finish is a big boot, leg drop, and Hogan gets the win. everybody goes home happy and he poses for 10 minutes. But other finishes are available. Sometimes the heel will win, typically by cheating. Sometimes he'll go to a double count out, or a draw. Sometimes somebody else will run in. But basically, that is all wrestling matches, is that sequence. I mean, there are other structures available, but 95% of all matches are that.
Does that ruin watching wrestling for you, knowing these formulas?
Not really, because you're if you really, it's like any art, right? It's like any art. It's like, does it ruin films? Or whatever. Does it ruin a film knowing that, I mean, it's basically the structure of every film or every play. It's Aristotle's kind of five acts, basically, or three act structure with various peaks and troughs. You could probably map that structure onto the Poetics, I'd imagine. Every Shakespeare play has really similar structure. Only if it's a tragedy, everybody dies. If it's a comedy, everybody gets married, right? But the art of it is, how do they get there? What are they doing in all those different parts, and how are they managing the crowd? And then when you really start getting into it, how do they start deviating from it as well? That's the basic structure. And how do you then start, or what else can you do,
Yeah. It's like the art comes in how you either subvert expectations or you reinforce those expectations, I guess. Like it's kind of like a typical, music structure or whatever, that it's still exciting. Like, you still know that, like, that you're going to have the quieter verse and then the explosive chorus and then the tag at the end and all of that. But it's still cool to listen to it and like have it actually go through that. It still takes you through that. Like, I was watching WrestleMania 3. This was my prep for the episode. Is I watched WrestleMania 3, and then when the when at the championship match, when it's Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, they're going through their various highs and lows and everything. And then Andre the Giant is giving Hulk Hogan like this big bear hug, and it looks like Hulk has passed out or something like that. And the ref like lifts up his arm and it just flops down, and he lifts up his arm and it flops down again. And then the announcer says, if it happens a third time, that's the end of the match. Lifts up the arm and then it falls halfway down, and he's like holds it there and just like dramatically raises the arm back. You know what I mean? Yeah. All this stuff is like, you totally, like, there was no way that I didn't see that coming, but when it happened, I just burst out laughing. It was still cool. It was just awesome. But I think that this is like, this is okay. So this is my big take on wrestling here, is that what it does is it kind of enshrines, let's just say, for lack of a better term, the rule of law, or like the tradition or the rules or whatever. Like in pro wrestling, the rules are sacrosanct. They kind of they're like the shape that the drama takes always. And it does this to reinforce basically a form of tradition, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, again, like the typical dramatic art is that the baby face and the heel, they start within the rules. The heel breaks the rules. The heel trounces the baby face, but he goes too far and he sort of pushes the baby face past the point of no return. The baby face's rage like boils over and he gets the second wind, and then he like rallies and comes back and he takes the palm of victory, right? And I think that the release, or the catharsis, if we want to use like an Aristotelian term here, it's not a matter of seeing the better man win, right? Because that's kayfabe, that it's been scripted ahead of time. Although I still remember a time when a lot of people I knew did not think that. But in any case, nowadays we watch it and we know that it's not a matter of seeing the better athlete win, unlike UFC or whatever, or unlike even like a dramatized UFC. Like you think of the Karate Kid or a number of like 80s martial arts flicks and so on. The catharsis is really a matter of seeing a traditional frame get avenged, right? The audience feels the release in watching the violation of the rules get punished in like this dramatic fashion. And so in this way, wrestling really is something, the three of us understand this term. It's very Tyrrhic. It affirms law. It enshrines something like logos, you know what I mean? Which is maybe how it appeals to like a red state America. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that or whatever. But in any case, the good guy wins, at least in the important matches. And it sort of reinforces the idea that at the bottom of reality is ultimately a kind of order. Natural law tends generally to prevail, right? Like the traditional frame can be of the rules with like, you know, the heel can like plead to the ref or like, you know, use the chair or some other sneaky underhanded technique. All this whole traditional frame can be dishonored, but it can't ultimately be defeated, and it will always ultimately win. And the match ends in affirming this conventional wisdom and morality. Now, obviously, that's not the way it happens every time, but that's the most satisfying end for us, I think. And that's like, you know, that's what it really it really is a form of drama that's not all that different from, you know, a Greek, well, maybe not a tragedy because that usually ends with the good guy losing, but you know, a Greek drama or a Shakespearean drama and so on.
You know what's really interesting about professional wrestling is that we're here talking about it, and it very clearly has formulas and elements of more classical like art, more classical performance. But like many things in modernity, in like let's say current year, it's regarded as a very low form of art. Like if you go to some sort of university somewhere with a bunch of, you know, highfalutin fucking, you know, a bunch of those types, they're gonna look down their nose at you if you say I'm a big professional wrestling fan, because they just assume that this is just something that rednecks watch. This is just for retards. But it contains all of these types of things. I always found that pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment from Mike about it being Tyrrhic in that way. I'm actually trying to think about, because I was thinking about this yesterday, because Hulk Hogan, as we are talking about him, right? From one point of view, from the point of view of now, he seems like the classic, right? He seems like this is the golden age. But in terms of the kind of long history of wrestling that we've been talking about, Hulk Hogan, in a strange way, was actually a departure, right? And I suppose the easiest way to think about this is the difference between Bruno Sammartino and Hulk Hogan. Okay, well, let me just try to go into this a moment. So Bruno Sammartino was like a hometown hero, okay? For it's not just Italians in New York; it was everybody. He was genuinely like an everyman figure, okay? He had a really interesting story. He escaped fascist Italy, you know, escaping from the Nazis. Went to New York. You know, they tell a story about how, you know, they were eating snow to survive when they were trying to like get away, Sammartino's family. And then he goes and works in the docks, and I don't know how, not actually exactly sure how Bruno breaks into the wrestling business, but like somebody's like, oh, who's this big guy on the docks? You know, maybe you want to come down and watch the wrestling or whatever. And if you ever watch Bruno Sammartino, he's a really genuine guy. Just like he's Italian, but he's like a proper gent, you know. He's just like really wholesome. And he had this special connection with the fans of that area, not just New York, but in Baltimore and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Boston. These were all big Bruno towns. And if you ever watch a Bruno Sammartino match, they are white hot for him. I mean, they love this guy. And it's like it's hard to explain how special that connection is. And what they used to do, at Madison Square Garden, they'd have a very set structure. So not only within the match, but between matches. Okay. Typically, a big heel would come in, let's say it's Ivan Koloff, the Russian bear, okay? He challenged Bruno Sammartino for the belt. First match would be some sort of fuck finish, right? Maybe Koloff uses a weapon and gets DQ'd, but he still gets to beat the crap out of Bruno, okay? Second match will be, I don't know, double blood DQ. They both bleed too much, and the referee calls the match, and it's a draw or something like that. Third match, Bruno just beats the absolute crap out of the heel, okay? And you get that moment of catharsis you're talking about, Mike, because order is restored. The hometown hero has, put this evil heel, whoever he happens to be, and it could be an evil foreigner like Ivan Koloff. It could be an actual Nazi like Waldo von Erich. There's wild footage from 1975 where Waldo von Erich comes in wearing a German Waffen SS helmet, does the salute to the crowd. There's almost a riot there, it could be a classic story of betrayal. So one of the all-time classic Bruno angles was Bruno Sammartino versus Larry Zbyszko. Larry Zbyszko had been a kind of protege, taken him under his wing, he'd kind of nurtured him. And then one day, in bitter kind of jealousy, Larry Zbyszko smacks a chair over his head. And, you want to see like a storyline filled with emotion and bitterness. And it's just like incredible drama, right? And again, white hot. And in the end, of course, Bruno will kick the shit out of Larry Zbyszko in a cage or something like that, okay? When Hogan comes in, he is a very different style of hero, right? He is much so Bruno is like a kind of everyman guy you can, you'd kind of go to the wall for. Hogan, when he comes in, is basically Superman. Does that make sense? He's like Mr. America or something. That's kind of what I thought of him as back in the day. Yeah, the immortal Hulk Hogan, who is the embodiment of American hardcore neocon spirit or something, right? He is gonna come and late. And what people don't understand, and if you go back and watch Hogan in 84, 85, 86, he was dirty. He would cheat. He'd use back rakes. There's this one bizarre period where he starts wearing this helmet, the Hogan war bonnet, right? And he cheated, right? So if you think about it, Hogan was, how can I put it? There was this dynamic where, okay, he would bend the rules too, but the crowd were in on it. The crowd were on his. The kind of was like, now it's time to give these guys a taste of their own medicine. So he wasn't Hogan was never squeaky clean in that way. He said take your, say your prayers and take your vitamins and drink milk and all the rest of it, but he was pretty dirty. And I've been thinking about that, what Hogan truly represented, because in a way he was, Mike, the Schmittian exception. And I know this because when I was a kid, I was a heel fan. I was always a heel fan, right? Which makes me weird. But of course, I'm a contrarian. I'm a kind of Gen X Daria or whatever. I was always going to root for the heels. And when I was a kid, that meant on commentary, you had Jesse Ventura or you had Bobby the Brain Heenan. And Jesse Ventura would always call out Hogan's bullshit. And I was like, you're right. Come on, referee, what you do? I mean, I remember I was a mark for the heel side. And being a heel fan, you saw how much bullshit Hogan would get away with. President Jack Tunney was corrupt. He was corrupt, but on Hogan's side. But obviously it was always all right because Hogan was the Schmittian exception. A morality warped round to whatever Hogan said was correct. Right? Did you understand this? So in a strange way, yes, there's this Tyrrhic structure that you're talking about, Mike, but Hogan almost came as Odin in a strange way.
Well, as you're saying that, it occurs to me that that the WWE or WWF, I don't know when it changed the name, but whatever it is, it changed over time. That it evolved and it became perhaps a little bit less Tyrrhic over time. And I'm thinking particularly as it entered into the 1990s, when McMahon himself started to become incorporated into the story and the business became an object of the storyline itself. And at that point, the black and white morality of heel versus babyface, which obviously was starting to be subverted earlier, really did become almost totally subverted, and the good guys and the bad guys becoming more entangled. It's really a much more postmodernist move, right? And by postmodernism, I mean, that's a very vague term, but what I mean kind of specifically about that is a form of like self-awareness. So, the medium is aware of itself as a medium, right? The fourth wall kind of gets broken down, and self-reflexivity, where the medium sort of just leans into that. And it's like, okay, well, it's like, a show about nothing where we have a storyline where we're trying to get a show like that kind of thing, right? Like that's totally postmodern. And the other thing I would say, as far as postmodernism, is it's a very particularistic morality where there's an absence of a hard and fast universal morality. And it's more like, each person or each faction out for themselves. But when McMahon comes in and he's not just the owner, but he's like a character in the story, and the WWE itself is like an object of the storylines. This is kind of an interesting move, because as I understand it, when this started to happen, they were really getting rocked with like scandals over steroids and like real life feuds and everything like that between other people, and like sleazy business deals. So they just said, okay, that's going to be part of the work now. And it becomes this power, like source of power and longevity for the WWE. It actually made things a lot more interesting. In some ways, probably sealed the future of it. But, and I understand that this aspect has been a little bit dialed back in recent years, but it seems like at some point, the black and white heel versus babyface kind of gets a little bit subverted. And along with all of that, the other postmodern aspects sort of come in, where the line between character and performer kind of gets a little bit blurred. I'll have to rely on you guys to fill that in with examples. But the one I'm aware of that's like probably the most egregious example was there was this real life love triangle between Lita, Matt Hardy, and Edge that got worked into a storyline. Like it was like a real thing that happened, and it actually just ended up being part of like the WWE or whatever. And yeah, I mean, there's other postmodern aspects that have been there from the very beginning. Like we talked about earlier, how the fans have it's very audience driven, and in a weird way, it's actually kind of not unlike Shakespeare, who, as I understand, would rewrite plays to some extent anyway after they premiered because of audience reception and whatnot. And of course, wrestling's long form, so there's lots of chance for the audience to make their wishes known. Good example of that would have been, there's a storyline about a guy by the name of Daniel Bryan in much more recent years, where this guy doesn't really have the optics that the WWE is looking for, but he's very talented as technically as an athlete, and a huge fan favorite. And in the Royal Rumble of I think it was WrestleMania 31, the crowd totally expected him to win and go on, but he didn't even get to fight. So the crowd ended up really laying into the last fighter, who they were like, okay, well, he's definitely going to come on now. But then he didn't, and they were just I forget who it was, but they just lambasted this guy, who ended up winning the Royal Rumble. But he became super unpopular for that, just because the Royal Rumble subverted the audience expectations. So the WWE creative team comes in and then actively rewrites the subsequent storyline to bring him back in and everything. And this is all just to say that fan input is really quite decisive in this medium. So yeah, it seems to me that over time, what begins as something like a pretty simple morality play changes a little bit to become much, much more complicated, much more dramatically in depth and everything as time goes on.
And I would also like to point out, you're talking about the Odinic force. Vince McMahon himself was the Odinic force.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't really realize how much he changed the industry. Like, this guy came in, like, as Mr. AA was talking about, you had like these local lords, like these guys that were doing it. And Vince McMahon came in and just unified all of it, took over, and didn't even really change it for the better. He just changed it in a way that was bent to his will to make him the most amount of money and become this vision of his.
It's kind of like a wrestling Napoleon or something.
Yeah. And what happened, as Mr. AA said, local wrestling pretty much died. And local people that would go see shows like all the time were now only seeing shows once in a while because Vince McMahon took all of the highest talent from everywhere. So for years, localities hated him and and to this day, still hate his guts, right? So Vince McMahon himself, and he didn't just do this once, he did it twice. And I remember, growing up in Pennsylvania, the East Coast is a hot spot for wrestling. A lot of people don't realize ECW came out of Philadelphia. You had, what were some of the other ones? You had Extreme Wrestling Championship. You had the Combat Zone, which was like an internet thing, but they came out of here. BCW's out of here. XPW's out of here. There were so many. There was tons of them everywhere. And what happened was he comes back around in the 90s. I'm sure everybody remembers when they bought ECW. ECW was the big dog out here, right? ECW, for folks that never saw it, go see some of the local shows that came out of the ECW back in the day, back in the 90s. They were fucking awesome. This was awesome wrestling. Really, really great stuff. And even some of the smaller ones were really big. But what happened was WWF came around again, and this is when they started coming out with like NXT and these kinds of recruiting apparatuses that were attached to WWF, and they started soaking up all the talent from all the really small ones. You mentioned Daniel Bryan. He comes out of Ring of Honor. CM Punk comes out of Ring of Honor. That was a local. I think they were out of Ohio. So he did it again. So people like guys that are local wrestling guys, really true, pure, old school wrestling guys hate Vince McMahon. So he was totally an Odinic force. So, and just like every other Odinic figure, yeah, that happens. He pretty much just burns the place down and rebuilds it. But then he also gave wrestling to the whole world. So it was like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I was just going to say, by the way, that if you're really interested in some of this history stuff, if you go on YouTube, type in Academic Agent WWF, I have a number of kind of long form shows where I look at Vince Senior, and then I've got one called How Vince McMahon Transformed Pro Wrestling, and a follow up I did where I actually looked at specific towns, how he did it, and all of that.
And I got deep dives into that.
I also have one that I made more recently that was actually shows a lot of footage where, like about the history of WWE TV before Raw. You can actually see like how he changed the product and all of it. So I've only made like 4 or 5 wrestling videos ever, but if you watch them all, you get a bit of an education. I also want to say that I remember being absolutely gobsmacked. I couldn't believe it because to us, Vince McMahon was just an announcer. He was just a dweeb with a mic. So when it was like, what? Vince McMahon is the owner. I kind of blew my mind when he became like Mr. McMahon. That was back when I didn't really know. Before the internet, you didn't really know anything, and you used to get like, do you ever get like the PWI, like the wrestling magazines? They were all written in kayfabe, so there was no like. If you were a kid, even as a teenager, I didn't like. Hey, you got an inkling, oh maybe this is fake kayfabe? Or whatever. But you're still basically a mark. So when I think it was like in 1996 when he was like actually became, oh right, I'm the owner all along. It was mind blowing. I couldn't believe it. And the other massive thing that happened in 1996 was that Hulk Hogan turned heel in WCW. Remember all the trash being thrown and the formation of the NWO. Like there was this moment. Mike is right, where all of the rule book got thrown out. And in fact, it's funny that you mention ECW because that was run by a chap called Paul Heyman. I knew him as the manager, Paulie Dangerously, back in WCW. Remember, he had the massive walkie-talkie microphone, I think you've got this interesting promoter who's doing interesting things and subverting the traditional forms. You kind of have a look at Paul Heyman's background. It's kind of interesting in that way. But he was really, they were really doing some pretty innovative stuff in 94 and 95 in ECW, breaking the fourth wall. They used to do this thing called worked shoots, right? Which is basically working in some of the real life stuff into the storyline. So you weren't quite sure if it was real or if it wasn't. There was a wrestler called Brian Pillman who did all these pieces straight to camera. Do you remember all those promos, Dave? And Austin, before he was Stone Cold, like in ECW, did a bit of that stuff as well. So, the working in of real life elements into the storyline was kind of an innovation, although I would say the extent to which where the pro wrestling character ends and the real life person begins is probably an age old thing, right? I mean, you remember I was mentioning our Harley Race in the 70s and so on. I mean, Harley Race was Harley Race, or even Fred Blassie to an extent, going all the way. Like these people lived their gimmicks because in the days of maintaining kayfabe, it was a set rule that if anybody said to you pro wrestling is fake, or if anybody started a fight with you, you had to win or you would be fired. So if you're in a bar room and somebody starts a fight, if you don't win, the boss will fire you. So that means that for many of those guys back in the kayfabe days, there was a blur between who the real life, like the kayfabe guy and the real guy. You get all sorts of scenarios where, so yeah, that aspect of it wasn't new, but the working in the backstage stuff into the product was new, I would say, in the 90s. The other thing to say about the 90s is that even though Stone Cold Steve Austin was an anti-hero, in a weird way, the storyline was very in sync with the morality of the late 90s. Like I'm thinking like Rage Against the Machine, right? If you look at the lyrics of Vince McMahon's song, what is it? No chance. That's what you got. You're up against a machine too strong. Pretty politicians, will find their place in line. The whole Austin McMahon storyline was about the little man, as represented by Austin, the little dude who's getting picked on at work, who's got an arsehole boss. So in a strange way, even though it was cast in like 90s anti-hero terms, a lot of the Austin McMahon stuff was very straightforwardly, I would say, like blue collar America wish fulfillment fantasy. Like who doesn't want to, kick the ass of their evil boss or take a stand against the corporation and the man? Because that's what it was all about. That whole storyline was very kind of anti-corporate, kind of pro blue collar America in a way. That was, am I wrong, Dave?
No, not at all. And you see this also with Degeneration X. As you were saying, his song, what was Degeneration X song? Just got tired of doing what you tell me to do. You know what I mean? That whole thing, degenerate, suck it. They're telling people, suck it, right? It was all about this.
X-Pac?
Yeah, X-Pac. You had Triple H. You had, you didn't know? Yeah, fucking what's his name? Yeah.
Road
Your
dog,
ass better call somebody. Yeah. You got, dude, that was great. That was great. But I think that really sang to people. Like, you could look at it from the framing of this is just like playing to people's liberal priors, right? Their liberal throneness. But I would say that the reason people have this, especially in the United States, why Americans have this is because Americans know, they might not be able to articulate this, but they know innately that their boss at their job is not a worthy, a legitimate, or authentic superior to them. He's just some fucking jerk off that he just like weaseled his way up the ladder. Americans innately know that the corporate ladder, the job ladder, all this kind of stuff, that these people that rule over them are not legitimate rulers. They're not legitimate leaders. So they go along with, you got to do what your boss says at work or whatever. But as soon as you get out, you're like, fuck that guy. Because you know he's not legit. You know he's not really, truly your superior in real life. You know what I mean? So watching that on TV was... it was kind of catharsis of, fuck my boss and all that kind of stuff. But it also played into, I think, a deeper, I don't know how to say it, a kind of deeper thing in the American worldview, that we know that there's a little something that's just not right. Right. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, now I'm really thinking about it. I actually think that the Austin McMahon Attitude Era stuff that on the WWF side was actually pretty traditional. Now that I really think about it, in so much as the babyface and heel sides were not blurred at all. Once you get over the fact that, okay, they're not acting like traditional babyfaces, they're degenerates, they're beer swilling kind of redneck and all this sort of stuff. Okay, so they're kind of got some heel characteristics, but in essence, it's pretty straightforward that their cause is righteous, right? Over in WCW, whether through ineptness or the ego of Hogan or the, mismanagement of that company in general, I think they struggled a lot more, because the problem they had over there was that the NWO were booked as heels, right? You were meant to dislike them, but they were cool.
Yeah.
And so what they were having over there was the heels were winning. The heels were going over. The heels were being cheered, kind of just through ineptitude, which is kind of like, and I mean, a lot of that stuff broke kayfabe and was postmodern in the way that Mike was talking about, but almost like inadvertently so. I don't know how self-aware, like, you get like absurd things like the finger poke of doom. Are you aware of that, Mike?
No. What's this?
This was when Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan came out. Hulk Hogan pokes Kevin Nash with his finger, who immediately falls down. Hogan pins him and wins the belt. So any semblance of...
pretty much an admission of kayfabe.
Yeah,
right,
I mean,
there.
Just kind of like totally fourth wall breaking stuff. I think a lot of that stuff went on much more in WCW than it did in WF, unless I'm misremembering. Can you really think of like times where Attitude Era Vince was genuinely kind of just destroying kayfabe in that way? Just like saying, yeah, it's a work. Because I feel like all of the really egregious moments happened in WCW for one reason or another.
I can't remember. I can't think of anything that would be, but I do. It was WCW for a lot of folks that might not be familiar. WCW was ran. It was like kind of like, this is ran by wrestlers for wrestlers, and kind of what you had was this kind of like criminal enterprise of these the big names making all the money, getting all the wins, and everybody else getting screwed. There's a lot of people, a lot of wrestlers that left WCW talked about this. Like, I'm making, jack shit. And then, you got Kevin Nash and Hogan and these guys flying in jets. Like, I'm driving in a busted Honda. They're flying in jets. So there was a lot of it was pretty corrupt over there in WCW. So I think that you're correct in they sort of did it on accident just by being self-aggrandizing. We can never lose because we're the big dogs kind of shit.
Now I'm thinking about it as well. You'd have to check the birth dates, but there's a huge element of this. It's so obvious now that I think about it. Was basically boomers versus Gen Xers, because the boomers, as represented by Hogan and Savage and all those guys, wouldn't bloody move aside. They wouldn't put over the new generation. They wouldn't. And think about the boomers. They still haven't let go. They still won't bugger off and give. So it is true, basically, that you get one generation of stars they won't go away, basically, until they all die or retire, essentially. And this creates a really weird bottleneck in wrestling as well, where you get like absurd things like Hogan. Doesn't Hogan come back again and win the WWF belt in like 2003 when he was doing like that Mr. USA thing? I think he won it again.
Yeah.
So you do get this problem, and this is where the real postmodernity kicks in, I reckon, is that wrestling has been unable, especially Vince McMahon's wrestling, has been unable to get over itself. Hogan always comes back. And Austin, now you've got to the stage where Austin will never really go away.
And The Rock.
And The Rock. So it's like, what is it now? 2023? Right? Wrestling has been living in the shadow of Rock and Austin for 23 years now. And the even longer shadow of Hogan, right? It would almost be like, to put it in perspective, imagine you were watching WrestleMania 3, Mike, right? And the commentators just wouldn't stop going on about like Lou Thesz. Lou Thesz this, Lou Thesz that, oh, and by the way, Lou Thesz is coming back in the middle of the... I mean, it's like, this is one of those strange things, because in the early days, what Vince did in his own product is he made a kind of ground zero, right, where there was no history before Hogan, almost to the point where you could do, you could do AC and BC, you could do like AH and BH, right? The before Hogan was ancient history, to the point where if it was 1985 and you saw a clip of like Bob Backlund era WF, it seemed like ancient history, like the misty. It's almost like in black and white, because he reset. I was just about
to bring up Backlund.
Yeah, what Vince did is he reset wrestling lore and history to a cultural ground zero. Also, he refused to acknowledge any wrestling outside of his own product, right? Mm-hmm. To the point where even established guys who are legends in the business would be repackaged and given a name, right?
Like Bob Backlund. Remember, they brought him back for this like pathetic little run. Like nobody even knew who he was. It was like Mr. Bob or something they called him.
Yeah. I mean, the example I was thinking of was in the early 70s. The NWA champion was Dory Funk Jr., the brother of Terry Funk. Mm-hmm. Terry Funk was also champion. When he brought them in the mid 80s, Vince was like, "Yeah, you can come and work here, but I want Dory Funk Jr. to change his name to Hoss Funk, and I want you guys to come out like dressed as cowboys and like with a cat." Because basically, what Vince was always thinking like a marketing man, and he was thinking, "Oh, well, everybody in wrestling knows who the Funk brothers are, but this kid over here doesn't know who he is, and basically he doesn't exist in my world." Right? That is why when Harley Race came in, he made him the king. Right? So, I mean, talking about an Odinic figure, Dave, when you worked with Vince, he completely repackaged your entire identity. Now he owns you and your name, right? To the point where whatever you did before doesn't matter. Pretty much the only guy in that in the early WF period who didn't get that treatment was Ric Flair. Ric Flair came in as himself, but he was the exception to what happened most of the time. And, in a way that was sad because a lot of history was lost or kept from you or whatever. But in another way, it kind of kept the product vital. And what I think has happened to the WWE since then is that it's become like overburdened with its own history.
It's almost like it's entered into the Spenglerian winter phase where all of the moves have been made. The cultural form has been exhausted. There's like this gridlock, you know what I mean? And who knows? Maybe the Caesar character for wrestling is on the horizon, because I mean that's what the Spengler thing would predict. But it definitely seems like it's reached that point where it's kind of ossified, and it's so self-referential and it's so self-regarding that there's almost like no new moves that it can make. You know what I mean?
It started to, and I don't know if you were watching, I don't know, when was that? 2008, 2009, when you had like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, and then you had like, what was that one guy? Ryback, and like some of these characters, and they were coming in.
Lesnar came in. Lesnar.
Yeah. Well, this was kind of like when Lesnar was gone for MMA. He kind of came back in a little bit towards the end there. But they started to like reinvigorate. They brought me back in to watch, right? A lot of folks were coming back to watch. And once again, they just trashed it because the older wrestlers did not like the new guys. Daniel Bryan, CM Punk. Now, CM Punk is kind of a like, he's like, he's a great wrestler. He's very entertaining to watch, but he himself is you could to an extent, you could say that he sabotaged himself. But there were a lot of great wrestlers that kind of popped up during this time. Some of them remained. Dolph Ziggler, for example, I think he's still there. But there were like a lot of guys that were like in this era, in this time period. I was like, man, he's fantastic. And then they just fall off because the older guys didn't want to let them. They were more concerned with, bringing The Rock back for SmackDown once every 6 months than they were with trying to lift up a guy like Daniel Bryan, who is, who comes in. And as you said, he came in, he gave him a real, his name before in Ring of Honor was Bryan Danielson, right? I think that's his real name. And he's like, no, you're going to be Daniel Bryan. We're going to change your name. And they bring him in, and he comes in with a bunch of fans, right? He was an indie circuit darling. He should have came in and been like, real hot stuff. But the older wrestlers didn't like him. He got sabotaged. A bunch of crap happened to him, and he got kind of, he left. It's like they could have really like reinvented themselves, but they like refused to.
Well, one of the weird things is that if you watch a few like older documentaries where, Vince doesn't give many interviews, right? But he does he occasionally talks on some of the WWE own produced product documentaries and things. It's very clear that Vince McMahon considers his artistic masterpiece to be Austin versus McMahon storyline and the Attitude Era, right? And it's a very strange thing because I see Vince McMahon as a great artist and as a great American in the mold of like Walt Disney, who we mentioned before, and a few others. Like, he's a true visionary, right? Yeah. But I think that in his own mind, he peaked with the Attitude Era. And it's a strange thing where it's like he's not going to allow anything else ever to be better than that. It's a weird blockage that he's got because he's done this so many years now where he just won't take the cuffs off, if that makes any sense. One of the things that made his original, like the 80s Hogan era stuff and some of the Attitude Era stuff vital and kind of alive is that there was an element to which nobody quite knew what was going to happen, right? Vince has always been a strong micromanager, but he would allow guys to go off script. He would allow, they'd be a couple of bullet points, and then basically guys would be allowed to go off and do what they wanted. Think of like Rowdy Roddy Piper on Piper's Pit, for example. They just wind him up and let him go a lot of the time. Nowadays, they don't allow any of that to happen. They kind of it's really like so many wrestlers have talked about how stultifying it is. They want to script individual lines now. And it really comes across as kind of forced, and that's why I really struggle to watch it now, because it's so like lame. The life has been sucked out of it, and unfortunately, as great as he is, a lot of that is on Vince himself.
Yeah,
because he just won't. I don't know. It's like he won't allow the product to become great again. Maybe because he wants. Maybe because in his own mind, the first 20 years is enshrined in gold or something. So he won't let anything ever be better than that again. I don't know.
It's also like his personality type. Folks that have never like looked into Vince McMahon, he himself comes from a kind of a busted background. He was a bad kid, had a rough family life. There was actually he was sexually abused as a young boy by a really nasty stepfather, estranged from his real father, and then he reunited with him. I can't remember if he actually did time in prison, but he was out stealing cars and almost got kicked out of military school. He's dyslexic, so he's not a very read man, but this guy is just an absolute machine. He's an absolute machine. Like, look at his body even now. The guy's like, he's 150 fucking years old. This guy's still built like a shit brick house, and he's still going. And his work ethic is unbelievable. There were a lot of wrestlers that left WWF because they couldn't keep up with Vince. He expected that out of everybody. Mm-hmm. And guys that have that personality type, that like that force of nature, I'm going to bend the world to my will type mentality, they get obsessed. And once they leave, once they really start to age, they can't accept that they're old and are not as good as they were anymore. So a lot of these types of guys will burn their creation down to the ground rather than give it to somebody else or let it eclipse what they once were.
Yeah, I mean, with Vince, it almost becomes like a kind of perverse, a kind of perverse tug of war between his will and what the crowd wants. It's almost like he's been at war with his own fans for like 15 years now. Yeah. Like you were saying about Daniel Bryan and not giving it to them. And he's like, nope, I said it's going to be Roman Reigns. It's going to be Roman Reigns, and he actually tried that. He actually tried it. It was already there with the Ultimate Warrior, right? Do you remember? He was like, doesn't matter what the fans do. I'm going to shove this guy down your throat and you're going to love him because I'm the boss. He is actually probably a psychopath. Remember, I mentioned Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man character. A lot of people said that the $1 Million Man character was actually like real life Vince. And this story is told about how he's in they're on a flight, right? They're on a flight, and there's this guy smoking, right? So Vince goes up to him and he says, "Hey pal, put that cigarette out, please." All right, $100, put the cigarette out. Guy wouldn't do it. $200, put the cigarette out. And he's literally counting out the $100 bills. $500, put the cigarette out, pal. Right? And I don't know how much the guy ends up with, like $1,000 or something, but he puts the cigarette out. And Vince is like, right, I've had my way. And that was what was important to him. And that's what he was like in real life. If you go and watch the early vignettes of Ted DiBiase as the $1 Million Man, he's in that big fur coat and he's driving the vintage car and all that stuff, and he's in the big house. All of that stuff was Vince's. The fur coat, the car, the house. It was real. It was actually his. So it's kind of a really he's a fascinating guy. But I also think a great American. Sorry, Mike, go on.
I was just going to say it strikes me that, obviously the WWE is gigantic and whatnot, but at some stage when an organization gets to be a certain size, it kind of outgrows its owner in a way. You see this a lot with companies where the guy who was able to get it from a business that was, let's just say, 5 guys in a garage to where there's 500 employees and it's long ago had his like initial IPO and everything like that. The guy who gets it from, let's just say, point B to point, F or something like that, isn't the same guy that's going to get it from point G to point Z. You know what I mean? And usually the one who kind of is able to do that and get it from a point of like, initially from its initial stages to its sort of like, let's just say the mid-range or so, is usually somebody he's quite creative and he's able to, go with the flow a little bit, but he's also a bit of a tyrant and he doesn't let people, it's his vision. And if it's my way or the highway, and then, he'll typically muscle tons and tons of people out, just keep the people around him that basically will do what he says, but he's brilliant. So that's exactly what's required. But after a certain point, you need the guy who's more of a manager. He's more of a Machiavellian fox type. You know what I mean? I'm thinking in history, we could make an analogy between someone like a Cyrus the Great, who was a brilliant, like he was the guy who built the company, right? And then later on, you get a Darius the Great, who is the people said of him, he's like a shopkeeper writ large. You know what I mean? He's the manager. He's the guy who's able to give guys some leeway and let them, in this case, analogously to the WWE, would be like, okay, you go off script a little bit, just like, here's the beginning, here's the end. It's almost like a jazz piece where you like, here's where you start, here's where you end, the middle is up to you, kind of thing. That's kind of what is more required perhaps at this point. And it's almost like Vince himself is kind of the problem, as much as he was brilliant in getting the WWE to where it is at its current stage.
It's also interesting. I'm sorry. I just wanted to pick your brain on something real quick. It's also interesting because what happened in the WWF and what wrestling at large is, I don't know if we can fully blame Vince because it's following pretty much all of culture. I identify this time period between, say, like 1975 to 1995 as this kind of like this modern golden age of entertainment. During this period, you get some of the best movies ever. You get some of the best music ever. You get just like some of the best TV, some of the best, just pretty much everything. And then wrestling falls into this as well, right? This is all happening during this time period. Why is it that time period produced this stuff? And why do you think it falls off after that? And why is it that WWF was kind of part of it?
Yes, it is interesting, isn't it? It is interesting. I was gonna just mention really quickly, by the way, I think Vince has actually sold the company now, hasn't he? To the guys who own UFC, is that right?
Oh yeah, that's right.
And even that was a pure Vince kind of deny it. Like he could have just handed it down to his family and to Triple H and so on. And even that was very kind of American. It kind of reminds me of like Daniel Plainview from that film, There Will Be Blood. He's like, I'm, if you're going to get rid of me, I'm going to go out in the manner of my choosing type thing. Yeah, I think you're right, Dave. There was this kind of high moment, and now we're kind of in the. It's almost like nothing has changed since the year 2000, 2001. This is not an original point, but it's like the culture's in a freeze, and I always think that pro wrestling is in a freeze as well. It's like, they're still coming out to the same kind of heavy metal style, maybe a bit more hip hop now, but you know what I mean, right? The aesthetic is basically in a cultural freeze in wrestling. I would love for something to happen so that everybody gets over it. But I think it's going to have to take the day of the pillow, by which I mean, the day the last boomer dies. I think that will be a kind of great release in so many different ways. And it may actually be the moment in which, to speak seriously for a second, Europe finally gets over World War II, because it still hasn't.
It may also possibly be the moment where the managerial apparatus falls apart too, because the boomers are the ones, for as much as we give them shit for lack of ideas and their sort of fantastical worldview, they are also the most competent by far of any of the generations. And I say this as somebody who is at least a spiritual Gen Xer. We cannot measure up to them in that respect anyway. Yeah, it's hopefully not. Hopefully it'll, things will continue to tick on, and we will actually be able to get over this, as you said, this mythos that's been dragging us down for so long. But yeah, I'm typically Gen X pessimistic about it.
I should say as well that personally, I think it's a bit of a shame now that WWE is now owned by this TKO group, because I honestly think Vince is the last great American tycoon. A figure on the level of a Henry Ford or somebody like that. And despite some of his creative shortcomings in recent years, I think it's a shame that even WWE now is being absorbed into the big blob. So that's the way everything seems to go. And it would be, I don't know, I think the whole thing needs to break before there can be a genuine renewal. I actually made a video last night looking at Disney. I've been doing this series looking at this guy Steve Turley's videos. It's called Disney Panics as the latest woke box office bombs. And I was actually looking at Disney's output, and literally, if you look at the films they're releasing, it's like, we're going to make Pinocchio again. We're going to make Snow White again. We're going to make. I mean, they're now just pointlessly remaking their own legacy, but in like a really shit way. So it's like almost Disney needs to be destroyed for something new to come along. Because it's like even woke. What is it? It's just like, oh right, now we're gonna do Pinocchio again, but he's gay or something. I don't know. Let's do Cinderella, but she's black. I mean, it's just like, this is not. It's shit. It's crap. as people who likes culture, it's like, well, I'm not going to go and watch that. Nobody wants to go and watch any of that sort of stuff. So,
and it's not even new anymore either, like it was a few years ago, kind of thing. I mean, they've done this with the Little Mermaid and all. It's so on and so forth, right? Like, we've all got young kids, so we see what it's like in children's entertainment and everything. And it's just predictable now. It's not even transgressive. I mean, it is transgressive, but it's not a shock anymore the way it used to be.
Yeah, it's just not good. On top of, like, if you put the subversive politics and all that stuff aside, it's just not good. You watch these modern Disney and Pixar films for kids, and it's like, they're just ugly looking. The characters are just ugly looking. The artists are incompetent. The writers are incompetent. These people they're not competent. They're not talented. These aren't very smart people. And it's like, I don't know how to see it. I think a lot of it is they're so hemmed up in this nepotism, this like network of nepotism that they can't escape. And it's like, and then also it's kind of like, they're so greedy that and like detached from their audiences. They're so big that they can't even really truly gauge what audiences like. You know what I mean?
But I have a 3-year-old daughter, and against the wishes of my wife, I've been watching Disney canon with her. The original Snow White from 1937, original Pinocchio. We've been just walking through them. Watched Sleeping Beauty the other day. which is an absolute work of art. I hadn't realized when I was a kid just how beautiful that film is, Sleeping Beauty. You know, I actually wonder if the Titan, right, the driving force, the Walt Disney or the Vince McMahon, is actually necessary. Okay, they may towards the end, like Vince did, you know, lose some of their creative powers. But I actually wonder if you can ever create art through kind of corporate committee or management, or indeed anything, because I often feel that America was at its most vital when you had these kind of, well, as Carlyle would call them, like captains of industry, you know, where Rockefeller and Carnegie and all these guys. I've noticed a tendency recently of people to try to like denigrate these or to try to wrap them into some sort of like conspiracy or something like that. I actually think a lot of that is, to put it frankly, the work of new elites who need to denigrate old elites so people don't look at them. But I actually think that America was at its best when it had the guys like that. And for me, Vince was the last of them, the last of that breed of, you can look at Elon Musk and people like that now, but I don't know about you, but there's something about the tech guys, whether it's Thiel or Musk, or there's something a bit fake about them. Like they're not really making anything real in the same way as, I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I agree. I am from an area that benefited greatly for many, many, many decades, long after he passed, of the philanthropy of Milton Hershey. Right, I grew up in an area that a lot of people worked at the Hershey. It was the Hershey chocolate factory. Hey, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hershey's chocolate.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. It's I got a bit to tell you about Hershey in a second, but go on.
So the Hershey chocolate factory was the biggest and oldest operating chocolate factory in the world. It employed people from all over the place. And Milton Hershey, he built hospitals, he built libraries, he built the famous school for orphans in Milton Hershey School. He built a theater. He built all kinds of stuff. The town is named after him, Hershey, right? And what's interesting to me is that so after Milton Hershey passed, it went into the hands of, I don't know if they were relatives or whatever, but it was like a local family. I believe their names were the Snyders. I believe they were called. Good old Pennsylvania born, old blood Pennsylvanians. And they ran it for many years. And eventually something happened. The father died. The kids sold it to these, bankers from Chicago. They take over. They trashed it. They kicked out the unions. They pretty much trashed it. They ruined the recipe. The chocolate sucks now. Everything about it sucks now. It is all just completely, everything about Hershey is illusionary, right? It's all advertising. It's all horseshit. And the product sucks. And the employees are miserable. So they outsource. Now if you go into the Hershey factory, they ripped down the old one. They didn't even turn it into a landmark. Oldest and biggest chocolate factory in the world. And they tore it down and they built a new one. And if you go in there, you will find a bunch of foreigners working there. They hire foreign labor and pay them nothing. So it's like this whole thing got Hershey's legacy is pretty much trashed. And in his aftermath, both the people that now are in control of his company shit on him, right? They say, "Oh, he was a racist, he was a fascist, and all this kind of stuff," which is true. He supported the Axis powers during World War II, and this kind of stuff. But also on the other side, there's conspiracies that he was one of the Illuminati. He was Jewish. He was XYZ. So everybody kind of shits on him. But at the end of the day, without Milton Hershey, that area of Pennsylvania, of the area that I grew up, would be very, very poor. We wouldn't have hospitals. We wouldn't have theaters. We wouldn't have anything. It was because of that one man and his That's the difference between those guys like Milton Hershey and Carnegie and Henry Ford, is that these guys were philanthropists as well. They viewed themselves sort of as a modern industrial baron or a lord or something, and they took it upon themselves to take care of the people. They didn't view themselves as separate from the people. Elon Musk, and I know some of his views are sympathetic to us or whatever, but Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and all of these big tech moguls, they don't have that. They don't give a fuck about the people. They don't care, and they're just they're just stacking money. They buy mansions all over the world, and they pursue their gay tech. And they're not even, like you say, they're not even making anything. Like what really is Elon Musk making? What he makes these fucking electronic cars that we don't really need. He sends people into space, which we don't really need. What is Zuckerberg make? It's just all very ephemeral, kind of spectral, illusionary things that they create that don't actually impact society.
I just wanted to say really quickly on charity. You see, they do philanthropy now, but it's all woke causes, or it's not actually anything that they're not like building schools or hospitals. It's like, oh, we're going to give some money to like gay rights, or we're going to give money to, this woke cause or that woke cause.
Which are rackets.
Yeah, essentially to what are in effect kind of fronts for, expanding their own power. Sorry, Mike, go on.
Well, I was just going to say that I think a lot of the difference is to be found in. Actually, there was a distinction made by an economist about 100 and some odd years ago, named Thorstein Veblen, between business and industry, which most people kind of think are the same thing, but they're actually quite different. Industry being, at the end of the day, industry being about producing a thing and actually creating value, and business being more about financialization of the economy and really, sort of like working the machinery of the state and the machinery of the economy, basically shifting money around to make money, right? Whereas a Henry Ford actually built something. So there is that difference. And an Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and so on, now, they're not exactly George Soros. They're not exactly somebody who's just basically playing the market, or who is, well, actually, a lot of them are very much sort of hooked up with like government contracts. So there is a fair bit of cronyism involved there. But really, they are much more beholden to finance, or they're much more beholden to like the business side than they are. Like, they are ostensibly what industry looks like today, but they're much more beholden to business than a Henry Ford or a Carnegie or a Rockefeller or any of these people were before, the great industrialists. So I think what they have is, although they are sort of really what industry looks like today, they share the class values of the merchant fundamentally. It was what we would really call these people now. So they don't really have the vision that like a Henry Ford does, to create all these foundations that are doing like genuinely good work to like build a legacy, like a legacy that's positive, that helps people really, because they share the class values of the kinds of people who are hostile to all of that, who are really all about radical change and mercantile values and everything like that. But sort of to pivot back to what we were talking about with wrestling, regarding all of that, and wokeness and ideology and the class values of these people, what I wanted to sort of touch on, I guess before we start to draw this to a close, is I wanted to pick your brain, AA, about because I mean, wrestling is really, it is the most popular live drama today. I mean, I think that's pretty clear, or at least at one point it was. It has to be the most lucrative live theater company in the world. But it's also aimed at like masculine working class men, which is a big part of why it's denigrated and everything. But this is really kind of what drama looks like to people today. So I wanted to get an idea. I wanted to get you to sort of elaborate on this. What can we take from wrestling about constructing a narrative, especially a moral narrative? Like, how can we see this? Are there any parallels to the way the elites do it today? Are there any things that we can take from them in terms of lessons about like telling stories from our perspective? Maybe just sort of wax a little bit philosophic on that.
Well, I think a huge part of pro wrestling storytelling, and by storytelling, I don't mean like within the ring. I mean when they're kind of doing angles and storylines, okay, is actually the amount of heat they put on the heel. A lot of what goes on is driven by the villainy in the first place, right? And then the babyface, if you think about it, is typically generating either sympathy or they've got a revenge narrative. So if you think about it, the babyface is either victim or they're enacting revenge. The heel, meanwhile, gets to have a lot of fun because the villains always have more fun in any medium. But they're corrupt. They break the rules. They they do horrible things. They hate the little guy, whereas the hero tends to stand up for the little guy. And I actually think that you can see a lot of that, a lot of what I'm describing in actually woke storytelling, if you think about it. Because in woke, you either have a victim or you have a revenge narrative, right? Which is basically all of, it's basically like anti-white resentment, right? And the way that they will paint the evil white, if you want to put it that way, has many of those heel traits. Or you could flip it around. You could say, well, how does it actually happens in a lot of white nationalist circles. It's just that the heels are different. This is not an original comment either. You are the victims and you're out for revenge, and the heels are the you-know-whos. It's kind of like any. Look at the way this conflict in Israel is playing out at the moment. Both sides are playing the victim, and both sides are accusing the other of deceit and skullduggery and breaking the rules and all the rest of it.
Just as a kind of digression from that, I wonder when this like the underdog or the little guy as a hero thing came in, because it seems to me that at some point, maybe in the deep past, maybe in the not so deep past, that it was actually great men that were considered to be virtuous and heroic, and that it was actually greatness and pedigree and lineage and these kind of things that were held up as heroic. Whereas now, and who knows how long, it has been something else. It's been about meekness and smallness and all of that. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad. It's just I just find it interesting that has changed over some period of time.
I only think it's just Christian morality. I've been reading through this book, Britain's Blunder, by Peter H. Nichol, where he's pretty pro-Hitler, to be honest. I'm going through it kind of chapter by chapter, but all of his kind of arguments are moral and kind of Christian in tone, and it's all framed in like, you need to kind of, when you're the bigger man, you need to you need to be the hero for the little guy, right? And I honestly think it's indivisible from Christian morality. I just don't think there's any two ways around that. I don't know if you guys disagree. Was there a time where Christian morality kind of backed the more powerful I mean, neocons, right? Neocons backing Israel is probably the only time it's ever happened, right? But you could say that's a kind of supremacist subversion of what Christianity is. I don't know.
And it also may be some a Levantine kind of view of the world that isn't really all that Christian. But with Christianity, I would say that it does exist, that like the celebration of what is great and high and noble, in the sense that Nietzsche would say, is there in Christianity, but it's always there. It's always mixed with paganism. It's in Beowulf. It's in Song of Roland. It's in the feudal world, and that's where you find that kind of stuff. And it's always there that you find this smallness attenuated. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to get us off track here. But that's very interesting about how the same sort of like the dynamic with the heels and baby faces and everything like that. It's to be found in all manner of storytelling. It's almost like wrestling is doing something universal. You know what I mean?
Even the MAGA, even if you follow MAGA storyline, right? The elites are the evil heels, and the poor downtrodden working man. I mean, MAGA is basically like Austin versus McMahon writ large, right?
Yeah.
I mean, am I wrong?
So we're coming up on 2 hours, but Mr. AA, I had a quick question I wanted to ask you, and then I want to list off some wrestlers and get your opinions, whether they're over or underrated. I want to do something fun to close it out. But I wanted to ask you, I know that you're a guy. So I listened to a fair amount of your stuff. I have read your book. I follow you on Twitter. You are pretty critical of Americanism, right? You are pretty critical, not just of Americanism, but of Americans as a whole. And wrestling is a very American thing, you know. So how is it that, like, how do you put those two things together? You very much love this very American thing, but you're very critical of American things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason why I'm critical of America is because I do believe, I know, I understand all the arguments, but I believe that America is built on, it is a propositional nation. Whether that was the intention or not, that's what it is. That is in its bones. I think I agree with Julius Evoler's analysis that it is negrified. I think even before that, it is basically a country built on worship of God's chosen people, which is very much self-evident right now. Unfortunately, it's this kind of great experiment which has these kind of really brilliant moments, because you do have some of the best and brightest in the world there doing these things. Some of the things that we're talking about, pro wrestling, which is a kind of indigenous folk culture, in my view. Some of these great American figures that we've talked about in the past. But unfortunately, it's all built on anti-tradition, anti-Europe, it is essentially an expression of everything that is dissolving all our history and culture. It's a tragedy. It really is a tragedy. But of course, I've grown up in an American moment, so I kind of fully internalized so many of these things. So it's very much a kind of love-hate thing. But you have to understand, a lot of my stuff is trying to get Europeans and trying to get British people in particular to de-Americanize their minds, because this stuff is suicidal, and so America will go, so the whole world will go. And I really what I want is for people to be able to preserve their traditions and their cultures and a sense of themselves. And you can't do that if the melting pot is devouring you. And the melting pot is quickly devouring everybody. So yeah, that is what. And in fact, even before all of that, and I'm probably going to write a piece on this soon. One of the real problems with America is that it is built on textualism, right? I really have a problem with textualism. Ultimately, it's Protestant, kind of crazy Protestant nonsense at the end of the day. We have this book and we read, have you read this bit in this bit? That means, therefore, or the Constitution. I mean, all of that crap is, I think, a kind of, it's a kind of fertile ground for exactly what has happened, right? I mean, to me, it's no coincidence that the only country in history stupid enough to, make Antony Blinken the Secretary of State. And you understand what I mean by that, right? It's like, okay, you've got these people in your country, but you're going to hand over the actual government to them now as well? You fucking stupid. But of course it happens in America, because America is built on, this kind of textual interpretive tradition where everything becomes, in a way, grounds for debate over what this line means or what that line means. And to me, that's a recipe for absolute disaster. But that is not to say, like, I don't like hate. Everybody's going through this, right? You understand? Like, it's not just Brits or Europeans who are having this. Americans themselves are having this. So in a way, my ideal state is for an American to listen to this and not kind of get all like rah patriotic about it, but in fact be like, yeah, this is obviously a fucking disaster, and for the benefit of the entire world, it would be good if my country stopped existing as a political entity forever, and for the good of my own people as well. That would be my kind of 2-minute rant on it. Mike, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, well, as you are sort of going through all of this, I mean, a lot of it rings true for me, because as a Canadian, our political identity has, throughout my entire lifetime, basically not being American, which is kind of a pathetic political identity. And, in the Canadian episode, which if you haven't heard it, I think you'd actually enjoy that, because I go into when I was a kid, basically, there was this little exchange I had with my parents where I asked them why America was so much better than us, and they were horrified. They didn't. Not only did they not understand, but it was like, I had said like a slur or something. They were just like, "How dare you?" kind of thing, right? But you can kind of understand, because among other things, the WWF emanates from America. Rock and roll comes from America. So many technical innovations come from America. There's all these things. It really is sort of the center of culture. So you can understand from my like 8-year-old mind or whatever why it was I felt that way. But as I got older, I came to really develop a serious sense of Canadian identity and what it actually is for what Canada stands for. And TLDR, we went on for 2.5 hours about this, but Canada really is the extreme Tyrrhic country. It is the loyalist country. And even still, you can see in Canadians, our loyalism is still structurally present, but our loyalism now is no longer to the Commonwealth. Our loyalism is to liberalism. And we are some of the most dogged defenders of that. So it still makes sense structurally that that's what what we would be. But for us as basically embarrassed loyalists or, ex-loyalists or whatever, even from that perspective, and I really do believe that it would have been better if we had all just remained British, I can still see in America, a lot of this sort of comes out of reading the book Albion's Seed, which I recommend to everybody that I talk to. I think it's super long, but it's also super worthwhile. Whereas America is actually many different countries. It's at least 4, maybe like 7 different countries that federated and never really hung together with a lot of coherence. And for that matter, so is Canada. And for that matter, so is the United Kingdom. But this is all to say that there are things in America that sort of predate unification or federalism that I think are very, very positive. The Americans really do represent the pioneering spirit that you can see in the Indo-Europeans. You can see, especially in the backcountry folk, that came from, well, maybe I say this because this is where I ancestrally come from. I come from the same stock. I really see in them sort of the essence of what America is, the Wild West. I think that is noble and good, and that there are other elements that sort of didn't really hang together. I would point to the Puritans, as laudable as they are in some ways, as sort of the source of a lot of what you're talking about in terms of like textualism and constitutionalism and propositionality and all of this stuff. So I think that there are definitely very positive strains in America that got kind of stitched together in a way that made some of those positive strains take a back seat to some of what wasn't so hot. And this is all just to say, before I wrap it up, that I think America should still be British.
We have to, after you talking about being Canadian, Mike, I have to mention one of the all-time great storylines, which was when Bret Hart turned heel in 1997 as the Canadian hero.
Yeah.
He came out, he cut a 22-minute promo on Raw. And I can't remember, how did he start that promo? I think he started it saying like, nobody glorifies criminal conduct like the Americans do. And he basically just like laid into America for 22 minutes. And that was such a brilliant storyline because Bret Hart in Canada was a hero. Bret Hart in America was booed. He was like a major heel. That was a brilliant storyline. That was kind of right at the start of the Attitude Era, really, but that stands out to me as one of the all-time great angles, which actually explores some of the stuff you were talking about, Mike.
It's a very typically Canadian sentiment.
Because Bret Hart within wrestling is the defender of tradition. He's the defender of wrestling. He's the defender of family. He's the defender of, being like super serious about stuff. So it was really kind of an interesting dynamic to do that storyline at that time, well worth a watch. I mean, that would be worth a show in its own. If you watch that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it because it would be.
I probably really will go back and watch that actually. Yeah. But yeah, America certainly has some very positive aspects of it that kind of got lost over time. But I think what's positive in it is ultimately what's ancient in it. So I guess that's sort of my final thought.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm asking you, AA, is because so I think from the outside looking in, a lot of times people, they look at the United States and they think that it's this big monolith, right? I have to explain this a lot of times that the different regions of the United States are the only thing that we really truly share is language, right? I'm an East Coast. I'm from German Appalachia. I'm an old blood American, right? My family landed here before America was a thing. And I have more in common with some Europeans than I do with Americans from other regions. We are very, very different. So it's like, from my point of view, like my family lands here, late 1600s. They had a huge, because they were German speaking, they were the first German speakers. So they had a huge beef with the establishment English, and they had a problem with that. And then years go on, they end up in the coal mines when capitalism starts popping off, working in the coal mines and on the railroads, getting treated terribly. And then we get treated terribly still to this day. So guys like me that come from like Appalachian roots or Pennsylvania Dutch roots, German roots, and even some of the different, I guess you could say, ethnic groups, sub-ethnic groups, I don't know what we are, in the United States, we don't have this loyalty to the machine of America. And in fact, we are the first ones that the machine steps on. Long before the gay crossed the oceans to poison the world, it poisoned us. You know what I mean? The filth in the water, the poisoned food, the propaganda, the crap, everything that everybody criticizes about the American machine, we were the first victims of it. And to this day, we're still the worst victims of it. So I'm just speaking, personally, it's tough to, read guys when they talk about, fuck America and fuck Americans and all this kind of stuff. I agree. Let me tell you, if a great British king rose up and tried to reconquer America, I would side with him. I would side with him. I believe that America still belongs to the crown, and I believe that America died when George Washington didn't accept the crown. The fact that we have no crown, we don't have that tradition, means that we've never become a country. We were never really a country. And we never, the fact that I identify with my locality and my regional ethnic group and everything like that, over, somebody on the West Coast or whatever. I'm not saying like F those guys or anything like that. I got love for those people and all that, but we're different people. You know what I mean? So it's, I don't know what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say here is that, for folks out there like Europeans that are kind of like to have these critiques of America, just keep in mind that Americans have these critiques as well, and not all of us are
yeah, but Dave, you have to understand my Twitter feed is pro wrestling, right? I'm just like a lot of the time I am deliberately working heel when I'm because it's so easy. It's just so easy, right? I come across like somebody eating. I tell you, there was one time they were selling a bucket of nachos, right? A bucket of nachos slathered with melted cheese, right? And it's just so easy for me to just give a little flick, and then I've got like 10 guys trying to defend the nachos. And it's just like automatic wins for me, But it's, I mean, that's just Twitter, You've got to be able to. You got to be able to kind of ruffle some feathers a little bit to make a wider point. And I'll give you an example, right? I made a video a while back called, when I really wanted to try to get people to understand this, like too much of American culture is wrapped up in worship of black people, right? This is the Julius Evola thesis of negrified America. I don't need to tell you this. And when I first came out with that video, I got a hell of a lot of pushback. But over time, I don't know how long it's been, like 18 months or something. So many guys were like, yeah, I have to give in. You're right. You're right, basically. So it's like a lot of it is like, okay, I understand that a certain amount of American patriots will be repelled by some of the stuff. But over time, I feel like doing it that way kind of gets people to actually see the truth of it, because it kind of, you make a splash, right? You make a kind of, it's a pro wrestling thing. Oh, look at this guy, look at this shithead, look at the stuff he's saying about it. And then it's like, because actually what I'm doing in persuasion terms, if you want to really get into the psychology of persuasion, I am activating cognitive dissonance, right? Because people don't like being, when something doesn't mesh with somebody's worldview, they get angry, and they experience cognitive dissonance, and their first instinct is to lash out at the person who's saying it, right? But over time, once somebody's been made aware of something, they then start seeing it themselves, and it's like, oh right, I can see what he's talking about now. So it's a kind of I will admit it's a little bit of it's slightly impish and slightly confrontational persuasion style, but it's something I've kind of always done. If you follow the long history of my channel, I've always going to hit people with, stuff that they find abhorrent at first, but over time they come to accept. But along the way, you're going to lose some people, right? But of course, if you're not making some enemies, you've got nothing to say, in my view, right? So anyway, go on.
No, I get it. I was just, I just wanted to ask you about it. So let's wrap this up with something fun. So I'm going to rapid fire throw some of the great names at you, and I want you to tell me overrated, underrated, or if you think that they're, they get their due.
Mm-hmm.
Shawn Michaels.
Overrated by a mile. Yeah.
Oh, why is he overrated?
Because Shawn Michaels inculcated what I call WWE main event epic style. Too self-conscious. It's just too self-aware, too self-indulgent, and too self-aware. Shawn Michaels is responsible for one of the worst moments in wrestling history, in my view, which was when he wrestled Ric Flair, and before he gave him the super kick, he said, I love you, and then he gave him the super kick. I mean, come on. I don't know. I just think that Shawn Michaels represents the worst of that kind of generation's self-indulgence,
What is this main event thing? I've read this somewhere, but I didn't pick up on what it is.
So WWE main event style. I mean, really what it is, if you really want to get into the weeds of it, it's a pale imitation of All Japan early 90s epic main style, right? But the trouble is that the All Japan guys, I'm talking about like Masawa and Kabashi and Jumbo Tsuruta and Kawada.
These guys. Is this like another wrestling league?
Yeah. I mean, there's wrestling in Japan as well.
Yeah.
But these guys were like masters of slowly building up a story. And there's all sorts of, when you really start paying attention to those All Japan matches, there's layers upon layers of stuff going on, right? And but anyway, there was a lot of moves in the All Japan style and a lot of false finishes, i.e. 1, 2, and he kicks out. He's done his finisher on him and he's kicked out. What's he going to do? How's he going to put him away now when he's already kicked out of his finisher? You've seen that match at some point in your life, Mike, right?
Yeah.
Now the trouble is that in the at some point the guys in America, they were getting the tapes of the Japanese main event style, and they then were like, well, we can start doing this, but unfortunately they just, partly because they weren't as good, and partly because the psychology wasn't there. You get a lot of these kind of long matches where it's just like a kind of, 20-minute finish sequence of endless false finishes. And unfortunately, in my view, Shawn Michaels was just never good enough a worker to make that sort of thing work. So I think he's overrated.
Ric Flair.
Ric Flair is great. Ric Flair is one of the greatest of all time. I made a 5-part series back in the day, making the case for why he's the greatest. But to get peak Ric Flair, you need to go back to the mid '80s when he was in his prime as the NWA champion. The matches with Steamboat. A lot of guys knock Ric Flair for always having the same match, but that's just not true. I've seen Ric Flair have, 4 or 5-star matches with guys like Lex Luger. He was phenomenal. Ric Flair really was, and he could work any opponent, many different styles. I have an essay from back in the day called "The 4 Faces of Flair." When you really want to get into it, he's got 4 different modes that he goes into. Because there's a kind of heroic Minnesota Flair, there's a chicken shit Flair, there's a psychotic Flair. He's a tremendous worker in my view. So I don't know if he's underrated though, because everybody says he's the greatest anyway. So yeah.
So you think he gets his due?
I think so. I mean, a lot of the guys who knock Flair are old, like the older generation, don't like him. Bruno Sammartino didn't like Flair, for example, because they said that he had a lot of the same spots in his matches. You've seen them, the Flair flop, the flip over the top, he's got a lot, but every wrestler has their signature spots. Every wrestler does. So I don't mind that so much.
And what do we got here? Okay. And what about Stone Cold? And that's the bottom line. Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, he was good. Austin was good. Really, obviously his character work was phenomenal. Great promo. Yeah. Actually underrated, I think, as an actual worker in the ring. Austin was a real student he was like a real student of pro wrestling traditions. So he's a good guy in my view. I don't know Hogan. I don't know if he's under Hogan. I would say is massively underrated by the typical internet smart fan. He is massively underrated. Hogan in his prime was a fantastic worker. Okay, he didn't do like 15 million different suplexes and drop toe holds and so on. What he did do is that he was very good at working the crowd. He was very good at selling the heels heat sequence. If you watch a typical Hogan match, he's getting his ass kicked for like 90% of the match. He could take a lot of punishment, and he was good at generating that sympathy. Obviously Hogan later, like when he's NWO Hollywood, I mean, okay, he's past his prime by that point. But peak Hogan, I mean, you go and watch Hogan versus like Paul Orndorff from 1986 or something like that. Brilliant matches.
And people forget how big he was, right? He was like, what is he, 6'8" or something like that? He was absolutely gigantic. Big guys don't move that well.
Yeah, but the thing is, Hogan could move, right? If you watch Hogan in Japan, he could work. He could do the drop toe holds and the suplexes and so on. He just what worked for his character was not that. It actually, like, a guy that size shouldn't really be doing all those different moves. He should be. He worked the correct psychologies for his character. Andre the Giant, the same, by the way. Andre the Giant, one of the smartest workers in terms of psychology that there was, right? And obviously he'd been wrestling for many, many years. He could do, there's an hour-long match with him and Harley Race where you can actually see how Andre could work when he wanted to. But it wasn't right for his character. And that is the whole thing. I think that one of the worst things that happened in pro wrestling history was the advent of the internet smart fan, because everybody was like, Dean Malenko, he's 20 times the worker that Hulk Hogan is, because look at all the moves he can do. Dean Malenko also like had the charisma of a stick. You understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
It's psychology as much, and character as much as moves. Yeah.
What about Roddy Piper?
Yeah, I mean, Piper was a phenomenal heel, one of the best promo guys ever.
I always found my favorite.
I always found Roddy Piper super annoying because, in the era when I started watching, he had become a babyface, and I was a heel fan, and he was super duper annoying as kind of coked out of his mind. You go back and watch the Piper's Pits, and go back and watch Piper in '84 and '85 and '86, and he's phenomenal, like one of the all-time greatest heels ever.
All right, let's go some Val Venus. Hello, ladies.
I mean, I don't know if he's underrated, or I don't know if anybody rates him, but he was all right. He was all right.
Gold Dust.
He was that was Dustin Rhodes, Gold Dust, and he was a good worker. Gold Dust was good, very good. Yeah.
Rikishi.
He was all right at what he did. He was all right, I would say.
Rob Van Dam.
Bit of a spot monkey for me.
Yeah.
Bit of a
Big
spot
Show.
monkey.
What about Big Show?
He shouldn't have done the moonsaults for me. Really? Should have learned to work like Andre, in my view.
What about X-Pac?
I mean, considering his build and stuff, he did pretty well for himself. I was never an X-Pac guy, though. I thought, again, he worked the right style for his physique, but I think there's a reason that he always struggled to get over at different times in his career.
Mankind.
I mean, yeah, to Mick Foley in general, right? Yeah, he was good. Yeah, he was good. I was never that much of like a quote unquote hardcore fan, because again, this was one of the things that ended up like breaking wrestling forever. I mean, it was fun for a while, right? But it's like, where do you go with it? Once you've seen like the barbed wire death match in Japan, like what else can you do? You know, but Foley's a good guy, and I think I actually like him best probably when he's Cactus Jack. That was probably his best character for me. So, I like Foley. Yeah.
And what about let's go back a little bit. What about Ricky Steamboat?
Yeah, Steamboat was great. Yeah, brilliant. I don't know about overrated because everybody thinks he's brilliant, right? But some of the best matches I've ever seen are Ricky Steamboat in them. Quintessential babyface. Super clean cuts. Kind of weirdly like dominated by his wife in real life, but I love Ricky Steamboat. Yeah, brilliant.
Vader,
badass, awesome.
Underrated.
Yeah, I loved Vader. Love Vader. One thing I'll say, one of the most emotional matches I can remember was Vader versus Ric Flair from the Starrcade '93, when it's Ric Flair's retirement. I mean, quote unquote retirement. He would wrestle many other times, of course. That whole storyline was so well done, where Vader was the monster heel and Flair was working that one as babyface, and Flair's with Gene Okerlund in the kind of car beforehand, and you know, it's super. Like, that is a brilliant match if you haven't seen it. Yeah. Let's do
a few tag teams and then we'll wrap it up. What do you think about the Hardy Boys?
Again, I was never that into the tables, ladders, and chairs thing because it's like you keep on elevating it, but where can it go, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, the Hardys were emblematic, really, of a lot of the things that ended up breaking wrestling in the long term. I actually think they're probably not bad guys. And Matt Hardy, I remember later, like years later, he came back, like 2.0 or something. I can't remember exactly. I actually think Matt Hardy grew into being a pretty good worker later on in his career. Jeff, too much of the spot monkey for me.
Here's one: British Bulldogs.
Yeah, I mean, the Bulldogs were a really good team. They were big in Japan as well. Dynamite Kid, though, by all accounts, was the biggest arsehole in all of wrestling. A lot of people really hated him. And was not a very nice guy in real life, apparently. Kind of a tragic figure, really. But when they were on, the British Bulldogs were a really good team. And in fact, you asked me how I got into pro wrestling. I remember going over a friend's house in Cardiff in like 1987 or 1988, and he had a British Bulldogs VHS tape. And I think that was the first WWF I ever saw, was the British Bulldogs tape.
New Age Outlaws.
That was Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, right?
Yep.
Yeah, they were good. Yeah, they were good for what they, for their era. They were a decent team, I think. They were probably in a spot that was better than what their talents were, which is probably is testament to how well they did, I guess, because they were in a way elevated above their talents, in my view. So, yeah.
Let's do Hart Foundation and then also Bret Hart himself.
The Hart Foundation were a decent team. They were a decent team. I mean, the WF had a very good tag roster in that period, where it was Jim Neidhart, and there was a lot of good wrestlers around then. Like, trying to remember who else was around. Like Volkov and Sheik were a team, and Greg Valentine and Beefcake. Not so much Beefcake. The Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation, and later on Demolition came in. And Powers. They were a pretty stacked tag roster for a while there. I mean, Bret Hart is a legion, like light years above Jim Neidhart as a worker, obviously. Yeah, I'm bigger. I prefer Brett to Shawn, even though I've never really liked Bret Hart as a guy that much. He's a bit full of himself in my view, but he was good. And in terms of pure WWF workers, there were probably not that many better than him if you just look within WWE. Yeah.
So let me rattle a couple. Go ahead.
You forgot the big one, Dave.
Who's that?
Paul Bearer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What do you think about the Ministry of Darkness? Overrated or underrated? AA.
Well, I don't know how much people rate them, but I remember living through it, and it was super duper fun.
You remember that? That was, you had the Ministry of Darkness. You had the Brood. Remember that?
Yeah, Gangrel, and it was really fun TV to live through. That was, I remember. Do you remember the big reveal? It was like McMahon all along. Do you remember that? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, yeah. Remember when they were going to sacrifice Stephanie?
Amazing.
Yeah. Yes, that was so good. Yeah, that was great, man. That was great stuff. Is there any like tag teams or wrestlers or anything off the top of your head that you think are really underrated that you think the guys should go check out?
Well, I mean, again, I don't know about underrated because kind of all of these are known quantities, but for tag teams, Arn Anderson was a brilliant tag wrestler. Maybe Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard.
Horseman.
Yeah, both in the Horseman and when they were the Brainbusters in WWF. Bobby Eaton was a great tag wrestler. He had a team called the Midnight Express with Dennis Condrey, and then later on it was with Stan Lane. I mean, they have some great matches. If you really want to get into Japanese wrestling, there's a wrestler called Riki Choshu, and he had a tag partner called Yatsu, who was actually an Olympian guy. If you watched all of their tag matches in All Japan, they have some phenomenal stuff there in 1986, 1987. The Funk Brothers are super, brilliant tag team.
Road Warriors.
I mean, the Road Warriors are good. I mean, if I was to watch a Road Warriors match, it would be against jobbers, right? Just beating the shit out of jobbers. That's their best role, in my view. Just, because against an actual opponent, they probably eat up too much of the match, right? Yeah.
What about what do you think about John Cena? Overrated, underrated?
Probably underrated.
Really? Why?
Well, I remember fans hating the shit out of him when he was around.
Still do, yeah.
Do they still hate him now?
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Like, John Cena had a lot of good matches, considering how hated he was. I remember he had a good match with that JBL guy. He has a good match with Lesnar somewhere.
Yeah,
he's got a number of good matches. He could pull it out of the bag when he wanted to. He was kind of like I see Cena really as a kind of Vince trying to go back to like a Bob Backlund style champion in a way. I mean, I know he had the stupid spinny belt and the gay little rap gimmick and all of that, but essentially Cena was Bob Backlund 2.0.
What about let me think. I don't know. I think we covered most of the really big names. You talk about Arn. What about what do you think about the luchador stuff, like Rey Mysterio and obviously some of the? You think that's too gimmicky?
I always struggle to get into lucha, like actual lucha, like AAA or whatever. But yeah, I mean, Rey Mysterio was a very good babyface. To give him his due, he was good. He was very good. That's I remember some pretty good feuds with him. Eddie Guerrero, do you remember that feud? That was good.
Yeah,
it was some good stuff with. Yeah, no, I mean, Rey Mysterio is probably an all-time great worker, considering his size and the fact he was working as a luchador in America. Yeah, he was good. Yeah.
You know who I think is one of the most overrated? Sting. I think Sting is a little overrated.
Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, he is.
Yeah. All right, cool. So to close it out, if you could give us top 5, give me your top 5.
Well, wrestlers of all time?
All time.
Terry Funk, without doubt. Stan Hansen. If you haven't seen him, he was an absolute ass kicker in Japan, but he was brilliant. Stan Hansen, Flair, obviously Flair. Now I really have to think. I like also in Japan. I like a guy called Jumbo Tsuruta. Again, really, especially as a grumpy old Jumbo Tsuruta in 1991 is really good. And I have to think. Top 5. I'll tell you who's really good as well from a little bit older, but Nick Bockwinkel. I don't know if you ever saw him.
No.
He was a really good kind of thinking man's champion for the AWA. Yeah, probably would go with those 5.
Hell yeah. That's good. That's a good list. That's good. It's probably better than my list. I would do Stone Cold, Mach, freaking Bret Hart. I would take Undertaker. That was probably one of my first favorites. I loved Undertaker. And number 5, I would probably take, let me think, somebody a little bit older, maybe somebody a little newer. I loved, I don't know who I would put at 5. Let me think. Maybe like a Kurt Hennig. Kurt Hennig was pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll go with that. That's a good. I mean, Vader might go on there. Dude, Vader was so. People forget about him, man. The way that guy moved, and how big he was, and everything like that. Excellent.
I tell you what I love about Vader was when he used to, when you get them in the corner, and he was really, really decking the shit out of them. That was so badass.
The Vader bomb.
You know when he's just like laying in his shots in the corner. He was very good at that. One of the all-time best at just like beating the crap out of someone in the corner. But anyway, yeah.
You know who else? Diamond Dallas Page. Diamond Dallas Page was one of my favorites. I met him at Philadelphia Comic-Con. He gave me a picture for free. That was pretty cool.
He's a nice guy by all accounts.
Yeah, he's really, really. So I went to Philadelphia. I'm a quick story, and then we'll wrap it up. I went to Philadelphia Comic-Con. It was my birthday. I guess it was like 2007. My wife got the tickets. We just got together. We were, very poor. We didn't have any money. We spent all of our money on the tickets and had like, a couple bucks to spend there, right? So we go there, and it was on my birthday, and we just couldn't buy anything. And I thought we could go up and meet. There's like all these famous people there. There was, CM Punk was there. What's his name? Chris Hemsworth, the guy that plays in the Marvel movies, was there. There's like all these. Patrick Stewart was there. I actually got to meet Patrick Stewart and shake his hand. That was pretty cool. And then there was also Lou Ferrigno was there. And I tried to get a free picture out of Lou Ferrigno and intimidate him. Turns out that even at like 100 and something years old, he's still fucking jacked. So he did not give me a free picture. He got pissed off at me. So I didn't get any free pictures. I was like, I was like, I want to get a picture with one of these celebrities that I like because I got no money. And I thought that it was my birthday, so maybe one of them would hook me up. The only one that hooked me up was DDP. I'm like, I just see him walking. I didn't even know he was there. I guess he was in the back somewhere. I see him walking. I was like, yo, DDP. He's like, first of all, I didn't realize how big he's a big guy. He's like 6'5" or something. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2", and he was like a lot bigger than me. So I'm like, yo, DDP, can I get a picture? I was like, dude, it's my birthday. We don't got no money. I was like, can I get a picture with you? He's like, yeah, don't let nobody see you. Let's keep walking. And like, whatever. So I stand with him. We get a picture or whatever. He goes, happy birthday, bro. And he gives me like a bro hug, like all this stuff. And that was pretty cool. So I got a picture with DDP, and that was my trip there. So really, really nice guy. Awesome stuff. I actually know a guy that went in. He's got like a yoga program that he does to help like vets and stuff, and went into his program and like really helped them. So he does a lot of good stuff for people. So that's it. That's the end of my story. We're coming up on 3 hours. We got to shut it down. So Mr. AA, bro, thank you so much for coming on and yakking wrestling, letting us pick your brain for all this time. Everybody out there, if you have not picked up his book, The Populist Delusion, you have to get a copy. It's one of those books that you just can't unread. It flipped me on my head with a lot of stuff. So you guys got to get a copy of Populist Delusion. You're going to love it. Mike, you got something you want to add?
Yeah, and Prophets of Doom. I reviewed it on the Substack. It's excellent. A lot of important thinkers in there, ably summarized as always, just like The Populist Delusion. So check that one out too.
Yeah. Hey, I got to tell you, I dread reading books from academics because they're always just these door-stopper tomes. I got kids, I got business, I got stuff to do. I can't read these giant, exhaustive books. Your book is not that. It's succinct. It has great pace, and it's a very easy, accessible read, even though you're tackling some pretty big stuff. So I do got to commend you, and thank you for that. So, guys, get a copy of Populist Delusion. Check out Academic Agent on his YouTube channel. Go subscribe over there. Hails and blessings to all the culture dads that tune in and support us. Hails and blessings to our God Emperor tier patrons, Mr. Kazilcom Cruiser and Marvin from AFD. If you're not signed up already, make sure to go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast or culturedads.com and go get signed up to the Gumroad over there so you can get so many awesome perks. Hardback copies of the Western Canon series and beyond. Hardback copies of The Populist Delusion. You're going to love it. Go get it. Go sign up. And you get Culture Dads every single week. You can't beat it. Help us keep the lights on. Help the Culture Dad machine keep growing. And help Imperium Press save the Western Canon from those who want to erase it. Go check out what I'm doing. Make sure to go over to thebizarrearchives.com. Follow us on Twitter and Telegram at The Bizarre Archives. Buy books, guys. Buy books. But until next time, I'll see you guys. Hails and blessings to all the culture dads out there. And I'll see you guys next time on Culture Dads Age of Sword.